Welcome to Sherlock Shadow Channel, where every story hides a secret. Grab your coffee, sit back, and dive into a world of twists and turns. Tell us where you're watching from. Drop your city and country in the comments. Like, subscribe, and share the thrill with fellow mystery lovers. Let the adventure begin. Hercule Poirot and the Puzzle of the Silver Doorknob. Chapter 1. The Inciting Incident. I have often thought that the most extraordinary adventures begin with the most ordinary of trifles. Yet as I stood on the polished marble floor of Lady Fairclough's drawing room, the gleam of that peculiar silver doorknob convinced me otherwise. It was 7:30 on a fine spring evening when I, Captain Arthur Hastings, recently returned from India, found myself once again in the company of the inimitable Hercule Poirot, whose little grey cells were already whirring with silent anticipation. The invitation had come by an embossed card. Venue, Fairclough Hall. Occasion, the unveiling of Lady Fairclough's latest acquisition. Time, precisely 7 p.m. That last detail was Hercules Poirot's boon, for punctuality was next to godliness in his book. I arrived at the iron gates just as the gas lamps winked on, flanking a long, winding drive through ancient oaks. Lady Fairclough, a tall woman of austere dignity, met me at the door with a gracious smile and led me inside. The entrance hall was sumptuous, tapestries of hunting scenes, an ebony grand piano, and, most striking, a heavy mahogany door at the end of the corridor, its handle wrought in sterling silver and caught in the golden glow of the chandelier. It belonged to an opera house in Naples. Lady Fairclough whispered conspiratorially as she guided me forward. "They're sure it is enchanted, or so the legend goes. Imagine a simple doorknob that hides a secret." She laughed delicately, but her eyes were narrowed with curiosity. Poirot arrived in his usual flourish, stepping with delicate precision onto the marble. His small moustaches twitched as he scanned the assembly of guests, aristocrats, collectors, and a handful of artists, all in evening dress. He paused only to greet Lady Fairclough with a courteous bow, then took my arm and said in his soft Belgian accent, "Mon cher Hastings, observe bien. I have the feeling this soirée will not be as innocuous as it appears." And so it was that the drawing-room door, stubbornly refusing to open, became our first puzzle. Lady Fairclough, eager to demonstrate her treasure, grasped the doorknob and turned, and nothing happened. She tried again with a polite frown. The assembled guests exchanged amused glances. Even Poirot gave a delicate sigh, as though disappointed in such a banal obstruction. "Perhaps it is locked," Lord Caversham mused, approaching with an air of superior expertise. He fished a key from his waistcoat pocket and inserted it. The lock clicked, but the door remained immobile. Scratches around the keyhole suggested someone had forced the lock at least once before. A ripple of laughter ran through the room until a scream split it in two. Lady Fairclough, still at the door, had staggered back, her hand pressed to her throat. A dark stain blossomed on her ivory chiffon gown. Guests gasped and rushed forward. Monsieur Poirot alone remained composed. With the swiftest of motions, he crossed to her side, knelt, and with the tip of a gloved finger pressed gently to the wound. Blood welled between his fingers, vivid and surreal. "Madame is wounded," he announced matter-of-factly. "Someone has concealed a mechanism inside the doorknob. It has just jabbed her neck as she turned it." Lady Fairclough's knees buckled, and a servant caught her before she could fall. I pressed close, my heart pounding. Poirot had already risen, his face unreadable, and marched to the door. He examined the silver handle as one would scrutinize a rare gem, turning it this way and that, peering into the tiny crevices. Then, with a tiny, ingenious instrument produced from within the folds of his coat, he lifted a miniature trap-door on the underside of the knob. A slender needle protruded. Its tip stained a dull brown. Poirot set to work, carefully extracting the needle and depositing it in a small leather pouch. He turned then, and all at once the whispers stilled. The gas lamps seemed to waver, and every eye in the room fixed on him. "Mes amis," he said, voice low but commanding, "we have witnessed an attempt on Lady Fairclough's life, but why conceal a weapon in so innocuous an object? And why here, tonight? We must consider not only how, but who." From behind us came the strained voice of Inspector Japp, who had been enjoying port and cigars in the adjacent library. He strode in, hat askew and face flushed. "Mon Dieu, Poirot, what in heaven's name has happened?" "Your presence is providential, Inspector," Poirot replied. "We require your assistance. This doorknob has been turned into an instrument of murder." Japp's brow furrowed. He glanced at the needle, then at the wound on Lady Fairclough's neck, now bandaged by 2 anxious physicians summoned from the nearby township. "Attempted murder, is it?" But the door was not yet opened. Was she opening the drawing room to reveal something beyond? At that moment, a hush fell. A younger woman in mourning black, a certain Miss Travers, niece of the hostess, stepped forward. Her face was ashen, and her hand trembled around a glass of champagne. I found the doorknob fascinating. Lady Fairclough displayed it yesterday, and I might have touched it. Perhaps I dislodged something." Poirot raised a small finger. "Madame, the needle is not dislodged. It is deliberately affixed." He turned to Lord Caversham, who had provided the key. "And you, my lord, had easy access to this gift before tonight's demonstration." Lord Caversham bristled. "I would never harm my hostess. My interest in antiquities is purely scholarly." "A scholarly murderer is still a murderer," Poirot remarked gently. He swept his gaze around the room, noting every subtle gesture, the twitch of an eyebrow, the tightening of a jaw, the avoidance of his piercing stare. He had already begun to assemble a mental tableau of motives and opportunities. Meanwhile, Lady Fairclough, brave to the point of folly, insisted on standing. "I will not be treated like a hapless victim," she declared, voice shaking but proud. "If someone here intended to harm me, they will not escape unchallenged." A murmur of agreement rippled through the guests, though some faces betrayed unease. The atmosphere, once festive, now crackled with suspicion. I watched Poirot. His keen eyes flickered from person to person, lingering for a breath longer on certain individuals. I knew that his mind was racing. Was the device crafted by a skilled artisan or a crude mechanic? Was the motive financial, romantic, or perhaps vengeance for some past slight? Why choose the doorknob rather than a more direct method? And what did this door conceal that was worth killing for? I was about to offer my humble assistance when Poirot laid a hand on my shoulder. "Hastings, mon ami," he murmured. "Observe well." The simplest detail can be the most telling. Then, to the assembled company, he pronounced, "Until I have heard every confession, asked every question, and observed every reaction, no one shall leave Fairclough Hall." A collective gasp ensued. The local police officers, summoned by Japp's earlier message, moved to lock the outer doors. Lamps flickered, as though in anticipation of the drama about to unfold. The ornate drawing room, with its flickering portraits and that now infamous silver doorknob, had become a stage set for secrets long buried. And so, with the gathering storm of suspicion swirling around us, the affair at Fairclough Hall, and the puzzle of the silver doorknob, truly began. Little did I suspect as I glanced at Poirot's inscrutable profile, that beyond the puzzle of a murder attempt lay even darker mysteries, cunningly hidden in the hearts of those assembled. Yet there was no turning back. The game was afoot, and Poirot's little grey cells were poised to unravel every intricate thread. Chapter 2. The First Clues. The morning after the attempt on Lady Fairclough's life dawned grey and overcast, as though the heavens themselves shared in the pall of suspicion that clung to Fairclough Hall. I arrived at the drawing-room shortly after 9, finding Poirot already in attendance beside the great mahogany door. His posture was rigid, his little grey cells evidently occupied with the puzzle of the silver doorknob. The household staff stood discreetly aside, their faces pale with shock. "Mon ami," Poirot greeted me in low tones as I approached. "Every moment lost is an opportunity for clues to slip away. We must examine the scene before it is tidied or disturbed." He tapped the polished floor with his cane, eyes fixed on the door. I nodded, retrieving my notebook and pen. Inspector Japp and 2 local constables soon arrived. Japp gave Poirot a nod of respect, though his brow remained furrowed. "Very well, Poirot. Lead the way." He drew a leather-bound folder of statements from last night's interrogations. "I have written accounts from several guests, some contradictory, others revealing with unexpected candour." Poirot inclined his head. "Merci, Inspector. But first, let us inspect the mechanism more closely." He produced a small magnifying glass and crouched by the door, studying the silver knob and its metal base. I knelt beside him, careful not to touch anything. The knob itself, once gleaming, was now tarnished and marred by faint scratches. Poirot's glass revealed delicate tool marks around the trapdoor hinge, evidence that a master craftsman had forged the mechanism. The needle housing was ingeniously concealed by a tiny spring, activated by the slightest inward pressure when turned at a precise angle. "Remarkable," Poirot murmured. "The spring is wound so tightly that only a hand of correct strength could trigger it. Too gentle, and it fails to move. Too forceful, and it locks entirely. Whoever designed this intended only one victim, and one victim only." He tapped the knob lightly. "Observe, the spring will no longer function. It has already discharged its poison, or in this case, its blade-like needle." I made a notation. So the assailant did not plan for more than one injury. Poirot nodded, rising to his full height. He turned to Japp. "Inspector, may I examine the needle itself?" Japp retrieved the small leather pouch from his coat. Inside lay the slender, blunted needle. Poirot held it delicately between thumb and forefinger. "Yes, notice how the tip is dulled. The poison has long since seeped into the wound, corroding the metal. A crude yet effective delivery." He turned the needle over. "There is no residue of a cork or stopper. The needle itself is the weapon, ingenious in its simplicity." Japp frowned. "And what of the poison? If it was delivered through a metal needle, would there be traces left?" Poirot tapped his ear thoughtfully. "Unlikely, unless the murderer intended to remove all traces. I shall request that the physicians preserve any swabs taken from Lady Fairclough's wound for chemical analysis. Meanwhile, we proceed with the physical clues." He stepped back and surveyed the corridor. The walls were hung with ancestral portraits, grim visages of Fairclough forebears, their cold eyes seeming to judge the present company. The carpet runner, once crimson velvet, was now removed. Poirot suspected it might have been stained by spilled blood. He pointed to a faint smudge on the polished floorboards. Hastings stooped to inspect it. A smear of dark fluid, perhaps blood, or mud from someone's shoe. Poirot handed me his magnifier, I held it above the smear, noting its irregular shape. It is indeed blood, likely Lady Fairclough's, as she staggered back, but it also contains tiny fragments of debris, sand, or grit. I straightened. Grit? But the corridor is carpeted, and the hallway beyond is stone-flagged. Poirot nodded. Correct, Hastings. So this grit must have been introduced. Inspect your shoes, mon ami. I raised my boots and examined the soles. Near the toes, I found fine, sandy grains stuck in the tread. Poirot's eyes danced. The person who tried to flee the scene carried this grit. It likely fell from their shoes as they advanced to the door. Now, in their haste, they left a trail. He held out his hand to Jap. Could we have the shoes of each guest checked for grit? Especially those who claimed to move about the hall last evening. Jap made a note. I will issue a request, though I suspect some may object to such scrutiny. Poirot gave a demure smile. Let them object. A guilty conscience is often the loudest protest. He paused, considering the doorframe. One more thing. Observe the underside of the trapdoor. There is a faint, reddish stain. He passed his finger over it, then withdrew. The stain is too dark for blood. This is rust. The trapdoor has sat unused for some time. The mechanism was likely installed days ago. I scribbled rapidly, needle affixed at least several days prior, mechanism unused until last night. Poirot continued, We must determine who had access to the door in the past week and opportunity to tamper with the knob. He glanced at Lady Fairclough's niece, Miss Travers, who had lingered by a window, pale and anxious. Poirot raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. Turning, he beckoned me forward. Let us go to the drawing-room, Hastings. I wish to examine Lady Fairclough's person and her recent movements. We followed Inspector Japp down the corridor. The drawing-room was now a scene of clinical inspection. Physicians in white coats working at a side table, Lady Fairclough reclining on a chaise longue, her neck carefully bandaged. Close at hand stood Miss Travers, wringing her gloved hands. Poirot approached and bowed gently. Madame, he said, voice soft, may I inquire how you felt when the needle struck? Lady Fairclough looked at him with gratitude and effort. It was instantaneous, a sharp jab, and then a flush of cold. I was dizzy, but I managed to stand until the servants caught me. She paused, tears pricking her eyes. I have no idea who could wish me harm. Poirot listened, attending to her every word, as if it held the key to the entire mystery. Then he asked, Madame, did you touch the knob only once? She frowned thoughtfully. I inspected it briefly yesterday, but only to admire its finish. Tonight, I grasped it firmly and turned it to show the guests inside. Poirot tapped his chin. Did you notice any resistance or difference from yesterday? She shook her head. No, only when I turned it the second time did I feel the sudden pain. Poirot gestured to Japp. Inspector, note that Lady Fairclough did not test the knob twice immediately. She turned it, felt no harm, and turned again. The mechanism may require 2 consecutive rotations. Japp jotted this down. Poirot continued his examination, walking slowly around the room. He paused before the long French windows overlooking the garden. The dew-laden grass glistened outside, but more importantly, the window stood slightly ajar. Poirot gestured. Hastings, attention here. This window was open during the evening in case anyone sought fresh air. Yet the sill bears footprints, not the polished soles of formal shoes, but the rough heels of a country walking boot. I leaned closer. Indeed, the sill bore 2 clear impressions, smeared with the same sandy grit we found in the corridor. Poirot smiled. evidence that someone entered or exited this room from the outside. The assailant may have escaped through this window after completing the task. Japp frowned. But no one reported hearing a window open, nor saw footprints in the garden. Poirot tapped his temple. Because the night was windless, the leaves did not rustle, and the garden soil, though damp, did not retain clear prints when pressed by a smooth-heeled boot. Yet the controller of the garden lights, Monsieur Bouchard, the French gardener, would know best. At that moment, Monsieur Bouchard emerged from the hallway, wiping his hands on a cloth. His dark eyes were hooded. Poirot beckoned him. "Monsieur, I would have a word." The gardener nodded, coming forward. Poirot crouched beside the windowsill, pointing to the prints. "Monsieur, these boots, are they familiar to you?" Bouchard's gaze flicked to the prints, then to his own feet. "Non, monsieur. I use rubber galoshes in the garden. These look like someone else's." Poirot stood, his moustaches quivering with purpose. "And yet, you saw the window open last night." The gardener's face paled. "I might have opened it earlier to air the room, monsieur. My lady requested it during tea." Poirot raised a finger. "Ah, yes, but the tape seal we placed at 5 o'clock yesterday was intact when I returned at 6. It could not have been opened afterward without breaking the seal." Bouchard swallowed. I did not understand. I only wanted fresh air." Poirot murmured. He turned to Japp. "Inspector, we have motive and means. Access through the window, possible knowledge of the seal, and slippers unsuited to leave clear tracks. We shall question Monsieur Bouchard further. But first, examine the soil at the window and in the corridor against a sample of Bouchard's galoshes." Japp nodded. "I will arrange it." Poirot looked to me. "Hastings, every subtlety matters. The grit, the boot prints, the dust patterns on the frame. In Christie's dictum, it is the small observations that reveal the grand deception." I closed my notebook, heart aflutter. The case had already taken unexpected turns, a hidden trap, footprints unseen by all but Poirot, and a gardener whose alibi wavered. As we dispersed to coordinate the next steps, I caught Poirot's satisfied smile. The first clues had been unearthed, and with them, the promise of a mystery more intricate than we had dared imagine. Chapter 3. The Gathering of Suspects. By midday, Fairclough Hall had settled into a tense quiet. Lady Fairclough, still pale but determined, insisted upon being wheeled into the drawing-room in her wheelchair, where the small circle of suspects convened under the watchful eyes of Inspector Japp and Monsieur Poirot. The ancient portraits seemed more imposing in the noonday light, their painted eyes following every cautious movement. I stood just behind Poirot's right shoulder, pen at the ready, prepared to record each nuance of expression. Poirot gestured elegantly. "Mes amis, we find ourselves bound together by an unfortunate event. Before any suspect departs, I wish to hear from each of you. Your reasons for being here, your acquaintance with Lady Fairclough, and your whereabouts last evening between 6:30 and 8. Let us begin with Lord Caversham." Lord Caversham, a tall, austere gentleman with silver hair and a habit of tapping his monogrammed cane on the floor, inclined his head with mild impatience. "I have known Lady Fairclough socially for over 15 years. Our families move in the same circles. Charity balls, art exhibitions, the occasional shooting weekend. Yesterday evening I arrived at 6 to discuss a proposed donation to the local hospital, which she has kindly agreed to under my patronage. I remained in the library until Madame's announcement at 7, then joined the party briefly before retiring to my chambers to prepare a ledger of figures. I can provide my valet's testimony if required. Poirot noted the slight strain at Lord Caversham's temples as he recited these facts. "Thank you, my lord. And did you at any time approach this door?" He indicated the mahogany door with its infamous silver knob. Caversham's brow creased. "Only to observe that it was closed and locked. I did not handle the knob itself. I was preoccupied with my papers." Next, Poirot turned to Miss Olivia Travers, Lady Fairclough's niece, whose black mourning dress spoke of a recent bereavement. Her large grey eyes glistened with tears. "Miss Travers, you were the first to summon help after Madame was injured. Tell us of your connection to the hall and your actions last night." She swallowed, her voice trembling. "I have lived with my aunt since my parents' death 2 years ago. I was in the gardens when I heard the commotion. I'd been lighting lanterns along the walk for this evening's recital and must have brushed against the window, but I did not see anyone come through. When I reached the drawing room, I found Aunt Marion collapsed." She paused, glancing at the window. I touched the doorknob when I tried to open the door to fetch help. I regret that now, but I did not know then of the danger." Poirot offered a comforting smile. "Your presence was indeed timely, mademoiselle. We shall examine that window and the remaining lanterns later. For now, thank you." At the far end, Colonel Geoffrey Montford, a grizzled retired officer of the Guards, cleared his throat. His uniform bore ribbons from foreign campaigns. "I am here as Lady Fairclough's guest and as her grandson's tutor in military history. I dined with Madame and a small group in the conservatory until 7 o'clock, then accompanied her to the drawing room for the unveiling. I admit I inspected the door, curiosity, you understand, but I found it locked and moved on." Poirot's little eyes narrowed. "Did you feel any unusual resistance, or hear any click when you examined the lock?" Montford shook his head. "Nothing, Monsieur Poirot. If there was a mechanism, I failed to notice it." The gravity in Poirot's expression deepened, and the inspector nudged forward a young woman with paint-splattered fingers and a bright silk scarf, Miss Evelyn Clark, an acclaimed portrait artist recently commissioned for Lady Fairclough's upcoming exhibition. Her auburn hair was pinned back haphazardly, and her eyes were sharp with intellect. "I was sketching the scene from the conservatory," she said crisply. "I arrived at 5 to observe the hall's interior light for reference, then joined the assembly at 7. I confess I lingered nearby when Lady Fairclough approached the door. I sought the perfect vantage point, but I did not touch the knob. My fingers bear no trace of the mechanism." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame Clark observes everything with an artist's eye, yet the instrument has eluded even you. Intriguing." He paused, as if weighing the import of her precise phrasing. Inspector Japp stepped forward to present Monsieur Bouchard, the French gardener, whose dark uniform suggested an air of devoted service. His rough hands hinted at toil rather than treachery, yet his clouded expression belied anxiety. "Monsieur Bouchard," Poirot began, "you admitted having opened this window earlier to air the room. Do you frequently enter the drawing room unaccompanied?" The gardener drew himself upright. "Only when Lady Fairclough requests it, monsieur. Last night she asked for fresh air. I unfixed the lower sash, then secured it back in place. I left promptly when the guests arrived." "And the seal we placed at 5? Poirot asked. Bouchard's gaze faltered. "I did not know of any seal, monsieur. I merely opened the window for a moment." His accent wavered, and he pressed his lips together. Poirot studied him for a moment longer, then moved on. "Thank you, monsieur. We shall return to you." Finally, Poirot's gaze settled on Inspector Japp himself, who tipped his hat and gave a wry grin. "I've interviewed the servants. No unauthorized comings or goings, all keys accounted for. And yet someone had ample opportunity. I stand ready to assist, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot bowed to the inspector. "Your assistance is indispensable, my friend. But for now, we must each consider motives. Inspector, I believe a table will aid us." He indicated the central oak table, cleared of ornaments. "Please place the names of each guest before us, one by one, and include their relationship to the lady and any potential reason for malice." Japp nodded, producing slips of paper. He called the names deliberately: Lord Caversham, social peer, potential beneficiary of Lady Fairclough's will; Miss Olivia Travers, niece and likely heir to a portion of the estate, emotional dependence; Colonel Montford, tutor to her grandson, rumoured tension over inheritance interests; Miss Evelyn Clark, artist for forthcoming exhibition, substantial fee at stake; Monsieur Bouchard, long-time servant, overseer of the grounds and perhaps privy to estate secrets; Inspector Japp, official interest, no personal motive, but keen on solving the crime. As Japp placed each paper before us, Poirot traced an imperceptible pattern with his finger. Each of you had motive, opportunity, and the skill, however rudimentary, to plan this crime. Let us not forget the hidden clues, the grit from precise boots, the failed mechanism requiring a specific turn, and the window allowing furtive entry or exit. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. This, mes amis, is a closed circle. No stranger passed through the gates last evening after 6. Therefore, the culprit stands among us. A silence followed, broken only by the muffled ticking of the grandfather clock. Each face in the room betrayed an undercurrent of apprehension. No one spoke, for each knew the truth of Poirot's remark. Within this elegant gathering lay a murderer, or at least an attempted one, driven by motives, yet concealed. Poirot leaned back, tapping the tips of his fingers together. "Tomorrow, we shall conduct individual searches of attire and footwear. Tonight, I ask each of you to reflect on your last movements and the details you may have overlooked, however insignificant they may appear. For in the little things, like the grit upon a sole or the strength needed to turn a doorknob, lies the path to revelation." With that, the gathering dispersed under Inspector Japp's watch. I lingered a moment to catch Poirot's eye. His moustaches quivered in a subtle smile. He whispered, "Hastings, each of our guests reveals more by what they omit than by what they say. We have gathered the suspects. Now let us watch them, and let our little grey cells do the rest." And so, with the circle complete and the suspects laid out before us, the deeper game began, one of hidden motives, concealed resentments, and the inevitability of truth. Chapter 4. Poirot arrives. I confess, it was unusual to find Hercule Poirot so unhurried. By midday, he had already orchestrated the initial examinations, gathered statements, and outlined his theories with that inimitable blend of gravitas and whimsy. Yet, as luncheon approached, he showed no appetite for mere sustenance, nor any inclination to rest. Instead, he drifted through the corridors of Fairclough Hall with the serene air of a man who already knows much more than he allows to show. I caught up to him in the gallery overlooking the grand staircase, its balusters carved into twisting vines. Sunlight filtered in through tall windows, illuminating the motes of dust that danced like nervous sprites. Poirot stood before a portrait of Lady Fairclough's great-grandfather, the Marquis of Ellesmere, whose cold gaze seemed to survey the present company with stern reproach. Mon ami, Poirot murmured, turning his head with the elegance of a ballet dancer. Observe how our friend the Marquis holds his hand. The posture is rigid, self-important, yet see the slight tremor at the fingertips. It is as though the painted nobleman guards a secret he would never admit. He tapped the frame lightly. Cette âme ancienne murmure, watch closely, for the past often repeats itself. I smiled at his theatrics, though I sensed an edge beneath the levity. Do you believe the portrait has any bearing on our case? Poirot's little grey cells must have been whirring. He tilted his head. Perhaps not directly, Hastings. But in mysteries, the atmosphere is as telling as any fact. The ancestors of Fairclough Hall were known for their fierce protectiveness of family secrets. If we find ourselves retracing their steps, or their sins, we must be mindful of how those shadows linger. He led me down to the drawing room, where the remains of luncheon had been cleared away. The central table stood polished, now bearing only a bowl of white camellias and 6 chairs, one for each suspect. Poirot deftly arranged the chairs into a semicircle facing him, then placed his own in the centre, as if preparing a stage. In the theatre of crime, he declared, every actor must play their part, and tonight I shall invite them onto this stage one by one. He paused, stroking his moustaches, their ends curling like question marks. But first, Hastings, I require your assistance. I took up my place beside him, keenly alert. Inspector Japp hovered near the window, his notebook in hand. The suspects, summoned by discreet notes from the dining room, entered one at a time. Their expressions ranged from polite curiosity to barely concealed dread. The first to arrive was Lord Caversham. He swept into the room, his coat-tails brushing the carpet, and gave a stiff bow. Poirot greeted him warmly, though his eyes gleamed with purpose. Lord Caversham, Poirot began, voice rich and courteous. Earlier you spoke of your philanthropic interests, but I have since learned that Lady Fairclough's donation to the hospital would reduce your family's expected share of her bequest. Monetarily speaking, that is a motive one does not dismiss lightly. He paused, allowing the words to settle. Would you care to comment, Monseigneur? Caversham's jaw tightened, but he recovered smoothly. Monsieur Poirot, I have never counted on Lady Fairclough's generosity as if it were owed to me. My intentions were purely altruistic. He flicked his cane. If I had desired her will changed, I could simply have requested it, politely, of course. Poirot inclined his head. Ah, but the language of wills is delicate. One never asks, one insinuates. Yet, no insinuation was made, which suggests either scrupulous honesty or a subtler design. He let the words hang, then gestured to the chair beside him. Please sit. Next came Miss Olivia Travers, whose grief-stricken face had paled further since morning. She approached with hesitant steps, her black gloves folded neatly in her lap. Poirot's tone softened. Mademoiselle, you stand to inherit a handsome portion of your aunt's estate. Understandably, that can feel like a burden as much as a boon. When you touched the doorknob last night, did you feel compelled by dread or by duty? She swallowed, eyes brimming. By duty, monsieur. I wanted to see the family treasure. I had no thought of harm, only admiration. She looked down, her voice choked. May I sit? Poirot extended a hand. Of course, ma chère. She seated herself, glancing at the silver doorknob on the sideboard as though expecting it to leap to life again. Colonel Montfort entered next, his bearing military straight. He saluted Poirot, who returned the gesture with elegant flourish. Colonel, Your role as tutor to young Edward Fairclough places you in intimate daily contact with this household's affairs. Have you ever discussed with Madame the disposition of her assets, perhaps in the context of securing Edward's future? Poirot's eyes sharpened. Or did your lessons stray into subjects more profitable? The Colonel's expression hardened. My lessons were strictly historical, monsieur. I have no interest in Lady Fairclough's estate. My loyalty is to my pupil's education. He accepted the offered seat, though his knuckles whitened as he gripped the armrest. Miss Evelyn Clark followed, her auburn hair gleaming like a flame in the muted room. She swept forward with quiet confidence, seating herself with the poise of a noblewoman rather than an artist. Mademoiselle, Poirot said, your commission was substantial, enough to finance your next exhibition in London. Does that not create a convenient incentive for early payment, or, should the worst occur, a sympathetic patron? He let the question linger. I know your work, Miss Clark. You capture not merely faces, but secrets. Tell us, what secret does Lady Fairclough hold? Evelyn smiled thinly. Monsieur Poirot, my art is not blunted by gold. I seek truth in pigment and form, not in market value. Lady Fairclough is a gracious patron, and I am grateful. She sat, scanning the assembled faces as though appraising raw material. Finally, the gardener, Monsieur Bouchard, stood in the doorway. His apron had been changed for a neatly pressed jacket, yet his hands remained rough. Poirot gestured kindly. Monsieur Bouchard, you care for these grounds as a painter cares for canvas. Have you seen anything amiss in the garden paths? Anything that might explain footprints unseen by others? The gardener swallowed visibly. Monsieur, I noticed disturbed soil by the rose bed this morning after the frost melted, but I thought it was wild creatures. He bowed his head. I did not think much of it until the inspector questioned me. Poirot smiled with genial sagacity. Ah, but every disturbed petal tells a story, n'est-ce pas? He rose gracefully, indicating the semicircle of chairs. Mesdames et messieurs, now that you have all arrived, I propose to put a simple question to you in turn. What did you most fear last night? A hush fell. Each person sat rigid, as though the very pronouncement of fear might unbalance them. Poirot's moustaches twitched in anticipation. I shall begin with you, Lord Caversham, he said softly. What did you most fear to lose? Caversham cleared his throat. My reputation, monsieur. Without my good name, I have nothing. Poirot nodded. Excellent. And you, Miss Travers? My aunt's safety, she whispered. I love her more than I fear anything. Poirot turned to Colonel Montfort. And you, Colonel, what was your deepest concern? The Colonel hesitated, then said, that I might fail Edward as a guardian. His welfare is my charge. Poirot moved on to Miss Clark and Monsieur Bouchard, recording succinct answers. When he reached Inspector Japp grinned. I fear missing the simple solution in a bed of wild imaginings. Poirot chuckled. Very good, Japp. And now, mes amis, I have observed your responses and the silences between them. Tonight, we shall share a meal together, and you will note who spills wine from nervous hands, who avoids the cutlery by the fish, and who laughs too freely at sombre jest. For in the manner of arrival, and in the manner of fear, lies the kernel of truth. As the suspects were escorted to the dining room, Poirot turned to me. Hastings, note carefully the subtle changes in posture as they arise. The investigation has reached a new phase, psychological theatre. I have arrived indeed, and now the act begins. He gave his moustaches a final, triumphant twist. Come, mon ami, let us observe the players. And so, with every suspect under Poirot's discerning gaze, the stage was set for the next act, one where illusions would fall and hidden truths would emerge, guided by the brilliant conductor of human intrigue. Chapter 5. Initial Interviews. Begin the afternoon sun cast long shadows through the drawing-room windows, as Monsieur Poirot rose from the table where our light repast had concluded. He tapped his cane lightly on the polished floor and addressed Inspector Japp with his trademark blend of deference and authority. "Inspector, if you please, let us conduct our interviews in the library. A smaller space, yes, but perfect for observing every nuance of reaction." Japp nodded and signalled to the constables to prepare. I followed Poirot into the library, its oak bookshelves reaching to the coffered ceiling, and its great desk strewn with dossiers, notebooks, and a gleaming silver inkstand. He motioned me to stand just inside the doorway, a silent sentinel. "Hastings," he whispered, "my little grey cells require fresh faces and fresh words. Observe tone, posture, choice of details. Each private confession will illuminate what remains hidden among the group." The first to be summoned was Lord Caversham. He entered with the studied composure of a seasoned aristocrat, but betrayed a quickening pulse when Poirot closed the door behind him. The detective seated himself behind the desk, legs crossed, and gestured as if inviting Caversham to take the visitor's chair. "Lord Caversham," Poirot began softly, "thank you for joining me. I wish to discuss your movements immediately before the unveiling last evening. You said you retired to your chambers after 7 o'clock to review your charitable ledger. Yet a servant reported hearing raised voices through the corridor near the guest wing at precisely 7:15. Can you account for your location at that time?" Caversham's throat worked as he swallowed. "I believe I was in my sitting room, monsieur. I was reading by lamplight and did not hear anything." He leaned forward, hands clasped. "I had no reason to leave until the announcement." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Is it not possible that you left the ledger for a moment? Perhaps to mix a restorative brandy, as draining as philanthropy can be?" He allowed a gentle smile. "No fault in any liquid courage, Lord Caversham." The peer stiffened, then released a breath. "I did fetch brandy, indeed, at 7:10. But I never left the wing after that until called to the drawing-room." His voice was firmer now. "I swear it." Poirot nodded, steepling his fingers. "Very well, but note this. Service logs indicate the butler delivered your brandy at 7:05, not 7:10. A small discrepancy, yet telling." Caversham's eyes flicked to the ledger Poirot had placed on the desk. Its pages were open to the entry of Lady Fairclough's cheque. "A slip of time can reflect a slip of memory, no?" Poirot tapped the ledger. "I shall compare the butler's time with other logs." "Thank you, Monseigneur." He rose as Caversham exhaled, uncertain which detail had undone him more, the butler's testimony or the detective's quiet insinuation. Next, Miss Olivia Travers was ushered in, her black gloves folded neatly on her lap. She sank into the chair, cheeks still pale, eyes bright with unshed tears. Poirot regarded her kindly. "Mademoiselle, I trust your aunt is resting well." "She sleeps," Olivia whispered. "The physicians gave her a sedative." Poirot nodded gravely. "Good. I wish to speak of your lanterns in the garden. You said you were hanging lanterns when you heard the cry. Yet the records show only 3 lanterns were placed, though you claimed 6. He leaned forward. "Can you explain?" Olivia's hands trembled. I miscounted in my distress. I got confused in the dark." Her gaze dropped. "I was trying to be helpful." Poirot gave a soft, understanding smile. "Emotion can deceive, mademoiselle, The night was dark, and lanterns flicker so. Yet the number matters. With only 3 lit, the garden paths would be dim, making escape through the window more perilous. "But you heard footsteps, yes?" She nodded. Soft footsteps, no more than 2. Someone moved close to the window, then retreated. Her voice steadied. "I thought it was only me and the gardener." "Thank you," Poirot said, rising. "You may go." Olivia left, shoulders slumped, and Poirot glanced at me. Note, her error in counting arouses sympathy, but also conceals intention. She wishes to appear confused rather than complicit. Colonel Montfort was the 3rd. He entered with measured steps, the stiff lines of military bearing at odds with his furrowed brow. He sat promptly when invited, eyes flicking to Poirot's desk, as though seeking an unseen barrier. "Colonel," Poirot began, "you tutored young Edward in the conservatory until 7. Yet I have learned that Edward dined with his governess in the nursery until past. How then could you both escort Lady Fairclough to the drawing-room at the same moment?" Montford's expression tightened. "Edward requested lessons in military strategy at the last minute. We moved to the nursery, so as not to disturb the guests. After his tea, I escorted him back to the drawing-room." He paused. "I stayed with him until the announcement." Poirot tapped the desk. But the nursery door stood ajar, and footprints on the carpet led not to the drawing-room but toward the east corridor. He leaned closer. "I am told you are fond of discipline, but also of discretion. Did you perhaps leave Edward with the governess briefly?" The colonel's jaw clenched. "I did. I entrusted Edward to Miss Willoughby while I spoke privately with Lady Fairclough about his future. But it was beneath the vestibule arch, not the east corridor." His voice was steady, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. Poirot nodded curtly. "We shall clarify with Miss Willoughby. Thank you." Montfort rose and departed, the rigid salute hinting at more than mere respect. Miss Evelyn Clark entered next, her auburn hair bright against the dark wood. She perched gracefully on the visitor's chair, gaze steady on Poirot. "Mademoiselle," Poirot said, "your sketches of the drawing-room were exquisite. Yet the sketch I was shown by Lady Fairclough this morning differs from what I see now. The placement of the silver doorknob is slightly lower in your rendition, an artistic choice, perhaps, or a clue unnoticed by more robust hands." Evelyn's lips curved in a faint smile. "Monsieur Poirot, I draw what I see, not what I expect. Yesterday's light fell differently." She tapped her sketchbook. "I can reproduce the drawing in full light for you." Poirot steepled his fingers. "I would appreciate that, but meanwhile I wish to know, did you speak with Lady Fairclough alone yesterday afternoon? I hear you requested an additional session to capture her likeness." Evelyn's smile wavered. "We spoke only of art, monsieur. She wished her portrait to reflect strength." I obliged. She paused as if weighing her next words. "May I go?" Poirot nodded, and she swept out. Finally, the gardener, Monsieur Bouchard, entered, his rough hands interlaced. He looked weary, his dark eyes guarded. "Monsieur," Poirot said quietly, "I thank you for your service. I wish to discuss those boot prints at the window and the rosebed soil." He produced a small tray with samples of garden soil and the residue from the corridor smear. "Compare these." Bouchard leaned close. He sniffed, then frowned. "They are not the same, monsieur. The corridor sand is coarser, grit from the stone drive. The garden soil is fine and rich." He flushed. "But I see no problem." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "The mixture is telling. The perpetrator walked from the drive to the garden, then to the door, carrying both materials. Yet you claim to have entered through the garden only once, and that was earlier. He studied Bouchard's expression. Tell me, monsieur, have you the boots you wore last night? The gardener hesitated, then set down his tray. They are in my quarters. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. We shall inspect them shortly. Merci. Bouchard stood, retreating swiftly. As the gardener left, Poirot beckoned me closer. Hastings, listen. Each interview reveals a contradiction, a mismatched timeline, a faulty count, an inconsistent sketch, a blend of soils. We have begun to unravel their stories. Now we must gather. Physical corroboration, boots, butler's logs, Miss Willoughby's testimony. The next step will draw the net tighter. I nodded, my pen poised. Through the library door came the low murmur of questioning and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. The first interviews had begun, and with each answer, the mosaic of truth grew more intricate, and the circle of suspects more ensnared. Chapter 6. First false lead. Late that afternoon, Fairclough Hall took on the hush of a fortress under siege. The gathering of suspects, once polite and composed, now moved like wary animals, measuring each corridor and doorway to avoid unseen eyes. In the library, Inspector Japp and Monsieur Poirot crouched over an impromptu workbench, a long mahogany table strewn with evidence, soil samples, boot impressions, the dulled needle, and the ledger of service logs. I stood behind them, my notebook open, ready to record each twist of the investigation. Observe, Hastings, Poirot murmured, pointing to two small trays. On the left, the fine garden soil from the windowsill. On the right, the coarse grit from the corridor smear. And here, he tapped a third tray, is the residue scraped from Monsieur Bouchard's boots. He lifted a small brush and transferred minute particles from Bouchard's Wellingtons to a white card. Note the similarity, he nodded toward the garden sample, and the absence of coarser grains found in the corridor sample. Inspector Japp peered through his spectacles. So the gardener's boots match the windowsill soil. Logically, he entered through the garden, but he did not venture into the corridor. Why would he carry garden soil when he claimed no reason to enter the drawing-room window after airing the room at 5 o'clock? Poirot's moustaches twitched with satisfaction. Precisely my thought. Yet the grit on the corridor floor came from the drive, not the rose bed. Therefore the assailant, whoever smeared that blood near the door, wore footwear suitable for the drive, not the garden path. However, he tapped the garden sample. Monsieur Bouchard's boots bear garden soil, so he did enter through the window. The question is, did he also venture to the door? Japp frowned. If he did, he would have carried both soil types in equal measure. He compared Bouchard's sample again with the corridor grit. But these particles are all fine, no coarse grit. So he never touched the corridor. Poirot nodded. Correct. So while he made a suspicious entrance from the garden, he is not the one who triggered the doorknob mechanism or smeared blood at the threshold. That act belongs to another. He set the samples aside. But this detail has led us to a false culprit in the gardener. Let us, for now, release him from suspicion and direct our attention elsewhere. Japp straightened. Very well. I will inform the gardener that he is no longer under arrest. He glanced toward the window. Poirot, I confess I was convinced by the soil match. It seemed an unmistakable clue. Poirot lowered his voice. Exactly, my friend. A false lead is the most insidious of traps, convincing, plausible, yet ultimately deceptive. We must avoid letting our enthusiasm for a strong clue blind us to the totality of evidence. He stood, smoothing his coat. Now, Let us proceed to the next false lead. As Japp departed to summon Bouchard, Poirot turned to me. Hastings, we must question those whose actions last night might place them near the door at the precise moment of the attempt, even if their footwear does not match the corridor grit. I suggest we re-interview Lord Caversham with respect to the butler's logs. We left the library and passed through the grand hall, where the portraits seemed darker now, their painted eyes curling in silent judgment. In the servants' quarters, the butler, Jenkins, awaited, his posture stiff but respectful. Poirot greeted him and produced the ledger. "Jenkins," he said, voice courteous, "you delivered brandy to Lord Caversham's chambers at 7 o'clock, did you not?" Jenkins bowed. "Yes, monsieur. The delivery was timed to the minute, as Lady Fairclough requested punctuality for all guests." He tapped the ledger where the butler's entry read 7:05 p.m. "I record it here." Poirot peered at the entry, then looked at Jenkins. "And you noted Lord Caversham consumed the brandy promptly within minutes?" The butler's lips twitched. "Indeed, monsieur. My lord returned the glass empty by 7:08, accompanied by a soft exhalation of relief, if I may say so." "A relief from what?" Poirot asked softly. Jenkins hesitated, gaze flickering. "My lord complained of a headache. He said the discussion of figures was taxing." Poirot nodded. "Thank you, Jenkins." He turned to me. "Observe, Hastings. Caversham's headache at 7:08 might indicate he encountered the doorknob mechanism himself, perhaps by turning it inadvertently while testing its smoothness. If so, he would have bled slightly and needed brandy to calm his nerves." He tapped the ledger. "Yet if he did injure himself, why deny any contact with the knob? Why assert ignorance?" I frowned. "Because fear of implication, perhaps. But his gloves, did he wear gloves?" Jenkins shook his head. "His lordship came ungloved, but he had a handkerchief to hide a small smear on his left palm." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then call Lord Caversham. We shall see whether he bears any stains or scars." Within moments, Caversham arrived, smooth as ever, though gaunt around the eyes. Poirot invited him into the servants' quarters and closed the door. I lingered in the hallway, listening as Poirot spoke in low tones. "Ah, you claim no contact with the knob," Poirot said. "Yet you bled at 7:08. Jenkins saw a smear on your handkerchief. You drank brandy to settle your nerves. Have you a wound, my lord?" Silence, then a sigh. It was nothing, an accidental nick with a letter opener. I apologized to the butler and disposed of the handkerchief. Caversham's voice lacked conviction. Poirot chuckled softly. "An intriguing story, yet forgeries are less likely than mistakes. I think you did test the knob, only to discover resistance, perhaps even pain. But you denied it because any admission makes you suspect." He paused. "I suggest you remove your gloves." Caversham hesitated, then removed his evening gloves. His left palm bore a faint pink scar and a small dark stain. "There," he said quietly. Poirot bent down, inspecting the palm with a magnifier. "Yes, the stain is blood, but dried. The cut is shallow, not enough to slow a determined man. Yet you bled, and yet you claim no contact with the mechanism. Forgive me, Lord, but I cannot dismiss this." Caversham's shoulders slumped. "I only tested it once, monsieur. I was curious. Then I feared I had injured Lady Fairclough further. So I denied it." Poirot nodded sympathetically. "Curiosity is natural. Fear of implication understandable. But this is not sufficient evidence of guilt in the attempt on Lady Fairclough. You held the knob, yes, but you did not intend harm. The blade did not strike you as sharply as it did her. I shall drop the matter of your hand." He turned to me. "Hastings, note well, Lord Caversham erred by testing, yet remains innocent of malice. Another false lead. We returned to the library, leaving Caversham to his reflections. Poirot sank into his chair and closed his eyes briefly, as if gathering his thoughts. Japp rejoined us, having informed Bouchard of his reprieve. "Now," Poirot said, "with the gardener and the aristocrat absolved of malevolent intent, we must turn to that guest whose alibi is strongest, and yet whose opportunity is greatest." He opened his eyes and looked at me. "Hastings, prepare for our next interview. The true culprit still hides behind layers of deception, and the first false lead has made the path all the more treacherous." Outside, dusk settled over Fairclough Hall, painting the windows amber. Within, Poirot's little grey cells spun ever faster, weaving the strands of truth from a tangled web of lies. The first false lead lay behind us. Now the real mystery awaited. Chapter 7. The Psychological Game. The drawing-room lay bathed in the soft glow of evening lamps when Monsieur Poirot summoned the suspects to reconvene. The ornate walls, heavy with brocade and lined with ancestral portraits, seemed to press inward, as though eager to overhear every whispered confession. One by one, the guests assembled. Lord Caversham with measured strides, Miss Travers clutching her lace handkerchief, Colonel Montford stiff and uneasy, Miss Clark's auburn hair catching the lamplight, and Inspector Japp surveying each face with keen interest. Poirot stood at the head of the long walnut table, his little grey cells visibly at work, moustaches quivering with anticipation. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, voice velvety yet commanding. "Tonight we play a different sort of game. Not of physical evidence alone, but of the psyche, of subtle provocations and carefully chosen words. I invite you to participate, for each reaction you display may reveal more than your spoken alibis." A hush fell. Even the crackle of the fire seemed to pause. Poirot's eyes glinted as he turned first to Lord Caversham. "My lord, you displayed commendable restraint earlier in admitting your curiosity about the doorknob mechanism. But tell me, when you tested that handle, did you feel a moment of triumph at having discovered its secret, however painful that discovery?" Poirot leaned forward, fingertips pressed together. Caversham's jaw tightened. He drew. In a breath before answering, voice guarded. Momentary satisfaction, perhaps. A craftsman's ingenuity is worth admiring, even if that craft was used for malice. Poirot gave a delicate nod. "Ah, but satisfaction born of mischief carries a different weight than admiration of art. Tell me, my lord, when faced with an ingenious device meant to harm, does one feel artist or invigilator?" He paused, letting the question hover. Caversham's eyes flickered, betraying a conflict between scholarly curiosity and moral revulsion. Next, Poirot turned his attention to Miss Olivia Travers. He produced a small silver mirror and held it before her. "Mademoiselle, I ask you to gaze upon yourself. See the niece who loves her aunt so dearly. Yet you, too, touched the knob twice, did you not? Perhaps only to help. It's a gentle impulse, yes? But tell me, when you touched it the second time, did fear or fascination guide your hand?" Olivia's breath caught. She peered at her reflection, whiteness of her knuckles stark in the glass. She whispered, "Fear, monsieur. I didn't wish harm, but I wanted to know." Her voice broke, and tears glistened in her eyes. The revelation hung between them, a fragile admission of morbid curiosity rather than guilt. "Thank you, mademoiselle," Poirot replied softly, placing the mirror aside. "Fear can drive one to unexpected actions, but it also constrains. Let us proceed." Colonel Montford's posture stiffened as Poirot addressed him. The detective produced a small, ornate compass, an antique belonging to the Colonel's military collection. "Colonel, this compass wound its way from your quarters to the drawing room last night. It fell from your pocket as you entered, I surmise." Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Tell me, did it guide you to young Edward in the nursery or to the doorknob in the corridor?" Colonel Montford's military bearing faltered. He cleared his throat. I brought it only to demonstrate a lesson on land navigation. It was never near the door." He paused, voice taut. "But if the compass speaks truth, I must have fumbled it when I paused in the corridor." His confession, reluctant and clipped, exposed a momentary hesitation that suggested more than a mere detour. Poirot nodded gravely. Hesitation indeed reveals intent. "Now, Miss Clark." The artist's calm visage remained in place as Poirot produced a small, folded sketch, a rendering she had given Lady Fairclough of the door, marked with minute annotations in her elegant hand. "Mademoiselle, you noted these tiny symbols here, beside the screw heads. You said they were embellishments, yet they align perfectly with the hidden trap mechanism's pivots. Did your artist's eye detect design that others missed? Or did you seek to discover a secret?" He tapped the margin where she had notations in pencil. "Confess, my dear, did you mark these for their beauty or for their potential?" Evelyn Clark's gaze sharpened. She drew in a steady breath. "I confess, monsieur, that the door's craftsmanship intrigued me. My annotations were merely artistic observations, nothing more. Had I known of the mechanism's purpose, I would have revealed it sooner." Her tone was placating, but her hands tightened on her purse, betraying a flicker of self-preservation rather than innocent enthusiasm. Poirot's moustaches quivered in approval. "A delicate balance between curiosity and honesty. And now, Monsieur Bouchard." The gardener's dark eyes darted as Poirot produced a single rose petal, slightly crushed at the edges. "Monsieur, this petal, found near the window, bears the same imprint as those you clipped from the rosebed yesterday, yet it was not fresh when discovered this morning." Poirot leaned closer, voice soft. "Tell me, did you pluck them early and leave them to dry, anticipating that you might need proof of your presence? Or did you pick them afterward to create an alibi?" Bouchard swallowed. He lowered his gaze. "I plucked them only once, monsieur, to refresh the room's scent for my lady. I did not think to save them." His hands shook. "If the petals near the window were dry, I cannot explain it." His distress was genuine, yet the discrepancy gnawed at his credence. Lastly, Poirot looked to Inspector Japp, who stood at ease with a self-deprecating grin. The detective produced a dispatch from Scotland Yard. "Inspector, your constant involvement here raises a question. Who requested this case be transferred from London to you? Was it concern for Lady Fairclough alone, or an opportunity to work alongside Detective Poirot?" Japp's grin faltered, replaced by a frank chuckle. "Touché, Poirot. I admit the chance to join you in person was rather appealing. But my duty is justice, not personal vanity." He tipped his hat. "I'm guilty of flattery, not of murder." Poirot's eyes softened as he concluded the round. He stepped back, surveying the group. "Mes amis, we have played our game, and now the heart reveals its secrets. We see the tremor of excitement in curiosity, the faltering of guilt in hesitation, the discomfort of deceit in too polished excuses. Each of you reacted, whether aware or not, to my gentle provocations." He paused, letting the room absorb his words. "Tomorrow, We shall see if these reactions withstand scrutiny under the light of day. Tonight, reflect upon your responses and your motives, for in the theatre of psychology, the most dangerous actors are those who believe themselves safest. As Poirot dismissed them, the suspects departed in subdued groups, their earlier composure cracked. Alone with Inspector Japp and me, Poirot let out a small, satisfied sigh. "Hastings," he said, "the game has begun in earnest." Each suspect laid bare a fragment of truth, veiled by fear or pride. Now we piece together these fragments. Tomorrow, with the final interviews and the reconstruction of events, the true culprit will find their mask slipping. He gave a final twist of his moustaches. The psychological game is most revealing of all. And so, as midnight approached, Fairclough Hall settled into restless slumber, its inhabitants haunted by the reflections of their own designs, unknown to them that Poirot's keen mind already traced the path to revelation. Chapter 8. A Secondary Mystery. By the first light of dawn, Fairclough Hall stirred with uneasy anticipation. Word of last night's psychological manoeuvres had spread through the household, leaving the servants' corridors humming like a disturbed hive. I followed Poirot into the servants' hall, where Jenkins, the butler, awaited with a countenance more anxious than the morning warrant. Beside him stood the housekeeper, Mrs. Winthrop, her keen eyes red-rimmed from a restless night. "Mon Dieu, Inspector," Jenkins said as Poirot entered. "There has been another incident." He swallowed and nodded toward the housekeeper, who produced a small folded envelope sealed with Lady Fairclough's crest. Poirot took the envelope with his usual courteous precision. "Expand, if you please." Mrs. Winthrop hesitated, then broke the seal. Inside lay the late Lady Fairclough's original will, dated 2 years prior, marked "Superseded" in bold ink. Beneath it was a second document, a humble codicil bequeathing the entire estate to an unnamed beneficiary, signed only with a simple flourish. Jenkins gasped. Madame discovered these papers missing from her private desk this morning. They were replaced by blank sheets. We searched her dressing room and here are the originals. He gestured helplessly at the envelope. She was to reveal the new will at tonight's gathering. Without it, her estate is in limbo. Poirot's little grey cells sprang to life. He frowned thoughtfully. A plan to remove all trace of the updated will, an effort to revert to the superseded version which favoured multiple heirs rather than one unknown beneficiary. Whoever orchestrated this stands to gain considerably. He looked up. "And you, Mrs. Winthrop, did you observe any stranger in the corridor last night?" She shook her head. "No, monsieur. But yesterday afternoon I heard rustling in Lady Fairclough's study. I thought it was the maid fetching shawls. I did not investigate." Her hands trembled as she handed him a single glove found beneath the writing desk. Poirot examined the glove, a delicate lace weave far too fine for any servant. "This belongs to one of the ladies, I believe." He slipped it into a protective envelope. "Jenkins, lock this away. It is evidence." Before further deliberation, Lady Fairclough's voice called from the head house staircase. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, please, to the dining room at once." We hurried down to the grand breakfast room, where a long table was set with the finest china and gleaming silverware. The suspects had gathered, their expressions drained of the bravado of the previous evening. Lady Fairclough herself sat at the head, her neck bandage now covered with lace, discreetly pinned by the house surgeon. She raised a trembling hand. "Thank you for coming. I intended to read a morning announcement, the discovery of my new will and the identity of its sole beneficiary. but I cannot proceed without these documents." She gestured to the empty desk beside her. "Instead, I propose a different gravity. My tea has been tampered with." A murmur rippled through the room. Miss Travers gasped softly. Miss Clark's eyes widened. Colonel Montford stiffened in his seat. Lord Caversham's composure wavered. Inspector Japp moved to the sideboard. "Madam, did you taste your tea?" "I did," Lady Fairclough replied, voice faint, and I felt a bitter metallic tang, so unlike my morning Earl Grey. I tasted only a teaspoon before I felt a wave of nausea. She glanced at her cup, now overturned. "I fear the murderer or manipulators seek to finish what was begun last night." Poirot stepped forward, cane in hand. "Mesdames et messieurs, we are faced not with one crime, but two, perhaps more. The removal of the will establishes a new crime scene, Lady Fairclough's study. The tampering of tea is yet another." He held up his hand. "Yet beware. A secondary mystery may serve to divert our attention from the primary culprit. Let us proceed methodically." He called for the house surgeon, who produced a small vial from his coat pocket. "I tested Madam's tea leaves for arsenic and strychnine, both negative. Instead, I found only bitter almond oil, a harmless yet unsettling flavor." The surgeon shrugged. An evocative choice, yet no true poison. Poirot tapped his chin, a theatrical flourish meant to terrify rather than kill. He turned to the assembled company. "I ask each of you, who prepared Lady Fairclough's tea this morning?" Miss Travers raised her hand. "I did, monsieur. I thought to ease her nerves." She glanced at Poison. Her voice quavered. "I found the leaves in the silver canister, which I lifted to portion the tea. I poured the water myself." Poirot nodded. "And who washed the canister last evening?" "Jenkins did," said Mrs. Winthrop. "After the dinner, he cleansed all silver before retiring." Jenkins inclined his head in confirmation. Poirot held the silver canister aloft. "Observe. The polished exterior bears no tarnish, yet within I detect a faint smear, as though an oily substance was recently applied." He tapped the lid. "Does anyone recognize this handprint?" He offered the canister to Lord Caversham, who inspected it with a white glove. Caversham shook his head. "I touched only the tray, monsieur." He pointed to the tray marks. "See how the silver bears no indentations from cufflinks." Poirot then presented the delicate lace glove retrieved from the study. "Perhaps the owner of this glove can tell us more." He tossed the glove onto the table. Miss Clark frowned and glanced at Miss Travers, whose cheeks pinked. Poirot's gaze settled on Miss Clark. "Mademoiselle, your glove, perhaps?" She drew a sharp breath. I use these for gallery openings, though I did not wear them yesterday." Her hand hovered over the glove, as though reluctant to claim it. Poirot raised an eyebrow. "Yet you admitted to being in Lady Fairclough's study yesterday afternoon." He paused, letting the gravity sink in. "And you alone had both motive to secure funds for your exhibition and opportunity." Miss Clark drew back. "I did enter the study," she confessed. "I sought to ask Lady Fairclough about the codicil, which she had hinted at in our last session. I borrowed a sheet from her desk while she fetched tea. But I would never poison her tea. I placed the sheet back, and the glove slipped from my pocket." Poirot nodded slowly. "A plausible sketch. Yet why choose a harmless flavor like almond oil rather than a real poison? To frighten, yes, but to what end? Perhaps to test the system, seeing if anyone cared enough to notice. The removal of the wills and the tampering with tea both convey a message. Watch me work." He looked up. The culprit is taunting us. Inspector Japp furrowed his brow. But while we fuss over almonds and papers, the real poison, the attempt on Lady Fairclough's life, goes unpunished. Poirot tapped the table. On the contrary, Japp, the second crime provides insight into the mind of our adversary. One who orchestrates documents and brews teas is calculating complexity, not panic. They wish to escalate fear gradually, as one might adjust a fine instrument. He turned back to the group. Tonight, we must secure the study and the kitchen. No one enters or leaves Fairclough Hall without my permission. Jenkins, post guards. Mrs. Winthrop, oversee the servants' activities. Japp, coordinate the search for the will, hidden perhaps within the library's false compartments. Lady Fairclough nodded, resolve returning to her pale features. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Whatever malice drives these acts, I will not cower behind locked doors. Poirot offered her a gentle bow. Brave, ma chère. You embody the spirit of truth. He then faced us. Hastings, this secondary mystery has served its purpose, to distract and to reveal the audacity of our adversary. But the path forward remains clear. Find the will, secure genuine evidence, and observe every subtlety of our suspect's behavior. He glanced at the windows, now aglow with lamplight. The game grows darker, but our resolve must not falter. As we left the breakfast room, the servants set to their tasks under Poirot's exacting gaze. Outside, the wind rustled the budding trees, nature's own whisper, as though urging us onward. And within, the second mystery lay poised to guide us deeper into the labyrinth of deceit. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. When I arrived in the drawing room the next morning, the atmosphere was charged with the promise of revelation. The long walnut table was again cleared, save for a neat stack of papers tied with black ribbon. Lady Fairclough stood by the windows, gazing out as though summoning courage, while Inspector Japp and Monsieur Poirot exchanged quiet words beside the hearth. I took my place at Poirot's side, aware that today's session would link the threads we had so carefully gathered. Poirot held up a pale envelope. Mes amis, we have uncovered correspondences and documents that reveal certain connections among us, connections previously concealed. Let us begin with these letters found in Lady Fairclough's private desk during the search for the will. He handed the bundle to Japp, who unfolded the first missive and read aloud in a clear voice. My dearest Olivia, I trust you will keep my confidence. The codicil that names the sole beneficiary must be preserved. Lady Fairclough's generosity can only benefit one, and that should be you. Arrange for her solitude in the study tomorrow morning. Ever yours, James C. A murmur rippled through the room. Miss Olivia Travers sank into her chair, her face pale. Lord Caversham, whose given name was indeed James, looked startled, then composed himself with the ease of a practiced actor. Monsieur Poirot's eyes danced. Miss Travers, note that this letter implies a close alliance with Lord Caversham, far closer than niece and family friend normally warrant. He turned to Lord Caversham. You have conspired with your niece to secure a singular inheritance. That is a hidden connection. Caversham's shoulders rose and fell in a deliberate breath. I acted to protect Olivia, he said quietly. But I did not wish her harm. Poirot nodded, but did not relent. Protection by deception is still deception, and deception invites suspicion. He moved on to the next paper, a diary entry in a leather-bound journal belonging to Colonel Montfort. September 12th. Lady Fairclough's disregard for my coaching of Edward is an affront. My skills are undervalued, my station diminished. If only she would recognize my worth, monetary or otherwise. Poirot tapped the journal. Colonel, this resentment clouds your professional duty. You and Lady Fairclough once disagreed over Edward's allowance, did you not? Montford's jaw tightened. A disagreement, yes, but I never allowed it to affect my service. He paused. Still, I was offended. Poirot gave a wry smile. Offence can be the seed of rationale. You and Lord Caversham share a history of financial disputes. Did you not, my lord? Caversham's gaze flicked to the colonel. Yet two rivals need not conspire to kill. Hastings, myself, noted how both men shifted in their chairs, posture stiffening in the sudden awareness of shared grievance. The third document was a receipt, dated the previous week, for tubes of Prussian blue and vermilion pigment sold by Miss Evelyn Clark to Monsieur Bouchard. The gardener's dark eyes widened as the slip was produced. Monsieur Bouchard, Poirot said gently, you purchase pigments from Miss Clark, yet we also know you have limited means. What arrangement binds you to her? Bouchard swallowed. I took the pigments in exchange for painting her studio floorboards. She preferred wood to marble. His voice faltered. It was an arrangement of convenience. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Convenience indeed. But such barter suggests trust, and time alone in her studio. A secret meeting, perhaps. Evelyn Clark's pale face belied a flicker of acknowledgement. We collaborated on lighting effects. That is all, she said, though her eyes lingered on Bouchard in a way that bespoke more than purely professional courtesy. The next paper was a sketch by Miss Clark, found in Lady Fairclough's portfolio. It depicted Colonel Montford's compass hung from the doorknob by a thread. Beneath it was inscribed, "The tool of direction, dangling precariously." Poirot held the sketch aloft. A curious metaphor, no? You, mademoiselle, chose to immortalize the compass and the trap in pigment rather than comment to anyone directly. Why? Evelyn hesitated, then spoke with quiet resolve. Because art reveals what words conceal. I sensed the mechanism's pivot, as you know, Monsieur Poirot, and I wish to capture the tension pending its spring. She paused. Yet I had no malice. My art demands honesty of form, not of deed. Poirot regarded her for a moment, then nodded. A revelation in paint, rather than in accusation. Finally, Poirot turned to a small crumpled note discovered in the butler's coat pocket, written in the neat hand of Japp himself. To gain Poirot's attention, pull the strings of a minor mystery. Let the real perpetrator watch as the garden soil dissolves into innocence and the gardener steps aside. Then observe whom you suspect next. A colleague. He placed the note on the table. Inspector Japp's eyebrows shot upward. I found this in my pocket and thought it clever. His cheeks reddened. I assure you I did not know who wrote it. Poirot gave a gentle nod of understanding. An ingenious diversion, Inspector. But note how your own colleagues may not be entirely unbiased. The circles of friendship, loyalty, and rivalry extend even to those who investigate. This colleague may be none other than Lord Caversham, friend of Lady Fairclough and patron of many such diversions. Caversham's serene facade flickered, betraying discomfort. I recorded each interaction, aware that the hidden connections ran deeper than simple motive. There was a web of dependencies, niece to uncle, tutor to pupil, artist to gardener, inspector to patron. Each bond produced opportunity and constricted alibi. Poirot rose and moved to the fireplace, where he placed each document in sequence. Mes amis, observe how this network constricts us. A niece guided by a guardian uncle, a colonel aggrieved by perceived slights, an artist entangled in barter, a gardener indebted by pigment, and an inspector influenced by patronage. Each bond reveals a thread of motive, yet no single thread holds the entire tapestry. He faced us with that piercing gaze of his. Tomorrow, we shall untangle these threads further with the final interviews and the reconstruction of last night's events. We will walk step by step through the corridors, reenact Lady Fairclough's approach to the door, and note who lingers, who hesitates, and who cannot meet our eyes when we reach the silent steps leading to the study. Turning to me, Poirot smiled. Hastings, you see the complexity. Yet remember, complexity can be the greatest camouflage. The true culprit will hide in plain sight, protected by layers of these connections. We must strip them away, one by one, until only truth remains. As the suspects dispersed under Inspector Japp's watchful eye, I caught Poirot's satisfied nod. The hidden connections were laid bare, and, with their revelation, we advanced another step toward the heart of the mystery. Fairclough Hall, it seemed, held more secrets than even its grandest corridors could contain. Chapter 10. Poirot's Secret Clue. The muted hush of the late afternoon settled once more over Fairclough Hall as the suspects were escorted into the conservatory. The glass roof, mottled with drifting clouds, cast variable patches of light across the palms and ferns. Here, away from the ancestral portraits and heavy draperies, Poirot found clarity. He positioned each guest upon a wicker settee arranged in a semicircle and took his place on an iron jardiniere, as though surveying a theatrical stage. "Mes amis," he began, voice soft but clear, "we have gathered evidence, uncovered misdirections, and revealed connections. Yet one vital clue remains hidden in plain sight, a detail so minute that it has eluded us until now. It is this clue which will transform our investigation from a circle of suspicion into a straight line toward the truth." He paused, allowing the gravity of his words to sink in. The suspects exchanged wary glances. Even Inspector Japp, standing to one side, leaned forward. Poirot's moustaches twitched as he produced a small rectangular piece of paper, no larger than a visiting card. "This," he pronounced, "is the slip of parchment upon which Lady Fairclough last recorded her appointments. It was found in the study, tucked beneath her night lamp. Note the entry for yesterday evening at 7:30. Unveiling of doorknob, guests to be present. But observe closely the handwritten annotation beside it, a faint carré, pointing to an empty space below." He held the card so that the guests could see. Beneath the printed line, a single letter had been added in pencil, the letter E. No more, no less. Poirot placed the card upon his jardiniere and continued. "This solitary letter implies that Lady Fairclough intended to add something, perhaps the name of a person whose presence she desired, yet did not complete her thought. Such an omission, I propose, is not accidental. It marks the moment when her trust faltered, when she suspected a hand in her affairs that she could neither name nor invite." He turned to Miss Olivia Travers. "Mademoiselle, you discovered the will and the tea tampering this morning. You would recall the moment you entered your aunt's study. Did you notice this slip beneath the lamp? Or did you replace it after discovering the missing will?" Olivia's eyes widened. She crossed and uncrossed her gloved hands. I noticed the slip, monsieur, but the pencil had worn down. I thought it unimportant. I did not inspect the scribble." She glanced at the card, expression troubled. "I did not think the missing letter could matter." Poirot inclined his head. "A reasonable assumption, for who expects the last thought of a cautious woman to be reduced to a single letter? Yet its power lies precisely in its brevity." He tapped his cane on the tile. "Now, Consider what that letter might signify. E. He spread his arms. E for editor, E for Evelyn, E for Edward, E for escape. He let the question hang. Lord Caversham shifted uneasily. Colonel Montfort leaned forward, nostrils flaring. Miss Clark, her auburn hair gleaming, regarded the card with keen interest. Poirot continued, I considered each possibility. Evelyn Clark, you have motive, opportunity, and an artist's eye for minute detail. Edward Fairclough, though absent, is our missing witness, young, impressionable, and subject to Colonel Montfort's tutelage, yet neither aligns perfectly with the letter. He paused dramatically, until I recalled the guest list card from last night's unveiling. From his pocket, he drew another card, the card each guest had used to sign the register upon arriving. On the card bearing Lord Caversham's signature, a small smudge marred the initial C, as though a drop of water had blurred the ink. But on Miss Travers' card, beside her neat script, Olivia Travers, a faint pencil stroke obscured the second letter, also the letter E. Hastings, Poirot said, observe that Miss Travers's own name contains two E's. Olivia spells no E's, but Travers contains one E. That pencil carré beneath the appointment card pointed not to an unnamed guest, but to the very letter in her aunt's schedule, an E for Travers's broader role in this affair. He held Olivia's guest card up. She planted this carré, mademoiselle, as a silent marker of her presence. Yet she did so lightly that the pencil mark faded by morning. A clever ruse, a letter that names no one yet names you. Miss Travers's face drained of colour. She rose, trembling. Monsieur Poirot, I meant only to remind my aunt that I would be there to assist her. I did not anticipate that someone would steal her will, tamper with her tea, or harm her. Poirot's eyes softened. Your intention may have been innocent, mademoiselle, but the execution was careless. You left behind a marker that connected you to the study moments before the will disappeared. Yet I do not accuse you of the primary attempt on Lady Fairclough's life, rather of interfering with her affairs. He tapped the card. This is a secondary clue, but one that reveals the breadth of involvement among us. He placed both cards side by side upon the jardiniere. On these slips, the faintest pencil mark, the most delicate smudge of ink, reveal more than 1,000 words. They tell us who moved through the rooms when no one watched, and who sought to leave a trace for fortune rather than justice. He turned to the group. Thus, we now possess a secret clue, one that names a hand in the disappearance of documents and the second mystery of the coffee. Yet it also illuminates the pattern of intrusion upon my lady's privacy. Poirot closed his eyes briefly, as though drawing together every strand of insight. When he opened them, they blazed with purpose. Tomorrow, we shall reconstruct the precise sequence of movements, step by step, guest by guest, through the corridors, the study, and the drawing room. We shall watch as Lady Fairclough approached the door, as the assailant's gloved fingers engaged the mechanism, as the will was spirited away, and as the card bearing the smudged name was placed upon the register. He bowed slightly. Until then, mes amis, ponder the power of a secret clue, a single letter, a faint pencil mark. For in the smallest of details lies the clearest path to truth. As Poirot tucked the two cards into his breast pocket, I felt the weight of his revelation settle over us all. The secret clue had been unearthed, not with fanfare, but with the keenest of eyes, and with it, the path to the culprit's door lay open, if only we had the courage to follow. Chapter 11. Tensions Rise. The afternoon sun slanted low and golden through the mullioned windows of Fairclough Hall's drawing-room, but the mood within was anything but warm. The revelation of the secret clue, the faint pencil E and the smudged guest card, had unsettled the gathered circle more profoundly than any direct accusation. As I took my place beside Poirot, Inspector Japp closed the French doors behind us with a soft click that echoed through the hushed room. "Mes amis," Poirot said, voice calm yet insistent, "we now know that Miss Travers marked her presence in the study and that Lord Caversham's card bore a telltale smudge. These details expose a network of intent, but they also strain the bonds of trust among you." He gestured to the semicircle of chairs. "Let tensions rise, for through conflict we shall see who stands firmly by their story and who quivers with guilt." He turned to Lord Caversham, whose composure had cracked slightly as the smudge on his signature card was displayed. The peer shifted in his seat, cane tapping once on the carpet. "My lord," Poirot began, "the smudge upon your card suggests moisture, perhaps perspiration or a damp sleeve, when you signed the register. Did you realize you carried such agitation before the unveiling?" Caversham's voice was measured but tense. "Anyone might sweat under such circumstances, monsieur, particularly after learning that one's own niece and longtime friend may conspire to seize an inheritance." He glared at Miss Travers, whose pale cheeks burned with mortification. Olivia's gloved hands clenched in her lap. She rose, voice trembling yet defiant. "I did not conspire to steal my aunt's estate. I only wished to ensure her comfort and security. If she named me sole beneficiary, I'd have honored her wishes." She met her uncle's gaze head-on. "I never asked for her will to disappear." Poirot nodded approvingly. "A spirited defense. Yet note how your accusation of conspiracy has wounded Lord Caversham's pride." He pivoted to Colonel Montfort, who watched the exchange with heavy-lidded eyes. "Colonel," Poirot said softly, "you noted in your journal a disquiet regarding your station here. Does witnessing this discord between kinsfolk trouble you, or does it reaffirm your conviction that fortunes, and not loyalty, govern human relations?" Montfort stiffened. "Loyalty is earned, monsieur. I have given my years to Edward's instruction. Yet I see now that I may be as easily cast aside as any servant." His glance flickered to the gardener's door, left ajar, as though weighing potential alliances. Poirot continued, "A tutor's devotion is admirable. But devotion can breed resentment when gratitude is not manifest. Observing Miss Travers's passionate defense, do you feel sympathy or competition?" Montfort's fingers drummed on the armrest. He looked away, jaw clenched. "I prefer not to comment." Miss Evelyn Clark, seated beside the Colonel, cleared her throat. Her voice, pitched low, cut through the tension. "Perhaps we should consider the matter of the missing will. 2 documents vanished, the superseded original and the codicil. Only someone with free access to the study and the knowledge of where such papers lay could retrieve them." Poirot's moustaches quivered. "Indeed, Mademoiselle Clark, and that brings us to you, who sketched that very desk, were granted studio time there, and whose glove was found beneath it." Evelyn's lips pressed into a firm line. "I admit I entered the study twice, once to admire the view, once to confirm that the codicil existed, but I left the documents untouched. I would never betray a patron's trust." Her eyes flashed as she spoke, her posture defiant. Yet the others exchanged glances. Lord Caversham's expression was guarded. Miss Travers looked on with sympathy. Colonel Montfort's face was inscrutable. Even Inspector Japp frowned thoughtfully. Poirot allowed the silence to stretch. Then he turned to the gardener, whose quiet presence at the outskirts of the circle had become almost spectral. "Monsieur Bouchard," he said, voice gentle, "you tend to the roses with painstaking care, and we know you to be meticulous. The petals you delivered to Lady Fairclough's room were fresh when picked, yet the petals by the windowsill were dry. Who dries petals unless to leave a deliberate message?" Bouchard's eyes flickered with fatigue and fear. "I did not dry them, monsieur. I clipped them early in the morning and set them beside the lamp as fresh garnish. If they were dry, it was the night's draught that wilted them." His shoulders slumped. "I swear I meddled in nothing but the roses." Poirot inclined his head. "A plausible explanation, yet some draughts, unseen, carry more than air." He paused, letting the unspoken accusation hang. Then he addressed Inspector Japp. "Inspector, you too must speak. The sly note in your pocket, a colleague, hinted at a diversion. Are you playing a part in this drama, or are you unwittingly its pawn?" Japp ran a hand through his hair, his cheeks colouring. "I admitted finding the note, but I did not write it, and I do not know its author. My only aim has been to assist you, Poirot." He looked around the room. "Yet I begin to suspect that loyalty can be found in unexpected places." A hush fell. The 5 guests, Caversham, Travers, Montford, Clark, Bouchard, regarded one another with new wariness. Each had been tested, parents of gain and loss, bearers of secrets, generous and distrustful alike, and none had emerged entirely unscathed. Poirot rose, smoothing his coat. "You see, mes amis, how tension unmasks more than words, glances, hesitations, the firmness of a refutation, all betray inner currents, yet these currents swirl in complex eddies. We have not a single revelation, but a confluence of half-truths." He fixed his gaze on Miss Travers. "Mademoiselle, you touched the doorknob twice and marked your aunt's study. Lord Caversham, you tested the knob once and wiped your card. Colonel Montford, you hesitated in the corridor on your way to Edward. Miss Clark, you sketched hidden hinges. Monsieur Bouchard, you entered through the window at night. Each of you has been here, each has had motive. But which of you has the cold resolve to endure these tensions and still strike again?" A faint rumble of thunder echoed through the high ceiling, as though nature herself awaited the answer. Poirot drew a small notebook from his pocket and closed it with a snap. "Tonight, the final act approaches. We shall dine and observe once more the subtle betrayals of expression, the tremble of a hand, the avoidance of eye contact, the forced laughter. Then, at last, we shall proceed to reconstruct the exact sequence of events, moments that will reveal not only opportunity and motive, but intention." He turned to me and Inspector Japp. "Hastings, prepare the timeline. Japp, secure the study and drawing room for tomorrow's reconstruction. Mes amis, reflect upon your choices and brace yourselves. None may say they have not been tested." As the gathering dispersed under the growl of distant thunder, I caught Miss Travers's eyes on mine, an unspoken plea for justice rather than exile. Across the room, Lord Caversham's features were drawn, prestigious composure fraying at the edges. Colonel Montford exhaled, as if steeling himself for what came next. Miss Clark's posture remained perfect, but her fingers twitched ever so slightly, and the gardener's footsteps echoed soft and hesitant as he closed the study door behind him. Fairclough Hall hummed with electricity, each heart within it poised for the climactic storm, and I knew, as I followed Poirot into the corridor, that the next stage would bring us to the brink, where tension would break, and the truth, however dark, would emerge. Chapter 12. The Confrontation. Late that evening, Fairclough Hall assumed the hushed expectancy of a theatre before its final act. The guests assembled once more in the drawing-room, their forms outlined by flickering firelight that danced across the rich tapestries and polished floor. Each suspect took a seat in the now familiar semicircle. Lord Caversham stiff in his velvet armchair, Miss Travers's eyes rimmed red with fatigue, Colonel Montford's uniform precise as ever, Miss Clark poised yet restless, and Monsieur Bouchard silent, his gardener's hands folded in his lap. Inspector Japp and I stood discreetly behind Poirot, whose posture suggested absolute confidence. Poirot surveyed the assembly with keen grey eyes. Mes amis, tonight we reach the moment of confrontation. We have observed your reactions, tested your stories, and gathered fragments of truth. Now, I turn my attention to the individual whose facade is thinnest, who trembles under the weight of a secret too great to bear. He turned first to Miss Evelyn Clark, who met his gaze without flinching. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Mademoiselle Clark, you are an artist of remarkable talent. Your brush captures nuance. Your sketches immortalize the subtlest detail. Yet you also painted the metaphorical portrait of the compass and the trap, indicating knowledge of the mechanism before any explanation was given. Pray tell, how did you learn of the precise positions of those hidden pivots? Miss Clark's lips pressed together. She lifted her chin slightly. I observed the craftsmanship, monsieur. It was my duty to study every detail for my portrait of Lady Fairclough. I perceived the alignment of the screws, nothing more. Poirot inclined his head, as though granting her a token of belief. Ah, alignment of screws, yet alignment of motive is more telling. You sketched the desk, the door, and even the knob. But tell me, did you also sketch the study's layout from memory after entering it through the window last night? His eyes flicked to Monsieur Bouchard, who tensed. Evelyn's calm cracked for a moment. She inhaled, sharply. I entered the study only once yesterday afternoon in full daylight. I never returned at night. Poirot smiled gently. Yet the petals found by the window were dry, suggesting someone left them earlier, and you barter pigments with the gardener for entry into your studio, not Lady Fairclough's study. The window was unlatched at night, and your glove was found beneath the desk, childishly left perhaps to mark your innocence. He paused, leaning forward so the lamplight illuminated his expression. Mademoiselle, I believe you re-entered that study after dark. Miss Clark's hand fluttered to her throat. That is nonsense, she exclaimed, voice louder than intended. I would not. How dare you suggest? She paused, eyes gleaming with hurt pride. I did go at night. I wished to confirm that the codicil was indeed present, only to ensure the truth of my patron's intentions. Her confession tumbled out, unbidden. I needed to see it with my own eyes, and I did, but I left it untouched and intended only to respect her wishes. I swear it. The room fell silent. Poirot nodded gravely. Your admittance reveals more than your initial denials, yet your intentions were not treacherous. He rose, straightening his coat. Let us turn our attention to another. He faced Colonel Montford, whose rigid posture betrayed suppressed emotion. Colonel, you claimed your lessons with Edward concluded before the unveiling. Yet footprints in the east corridor match your boots, and you admitted hesitation there, implying a purpose beyond mere escort. Poirot produced a small compass. This device fell from your pocket. Did you not pocket it with purpose to find your way to the study rather than to Edward's side? Montford's face hardened. He took the compass, clenched in his palm. I paused in the corridor indeed, my mind occupied with a matter dear to my heart. Edward's future, yes, but also my own. I wished to speak with Lady Fairclough about a further appointment, but I did not go beyond the landing. He met Poirot's gaze defiantly. I did not enter the study, nor did I touch the knob. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Yet on your way, you must have eyed the doorknob, curious to test its smoothness, if only to steady your nerves. He let the implication hang. Montfort stiffened, then gently placed the compass on the table. I was tempted, he admitted, voice low. My loyalties divided between duty to Edward and hope for advancement, but I withdrew before action. Poirot inclined his head. Temptation without execution marks loyalty, not guilt. He turned to Lord Caversham, who had grown pale under the twin emotions of guilt and indignation. My lord, when you tested the knob at 7:08, you bled slightly beneath your glove. You then reviewed Lady Fairclough's will privately in her study, as indicated by your nephew's letter. That letter named only the initial for a beneficiary, an E. Yet your own card bore a smudge from moisture. Was that blood on your wool sleeve? Caversham's voice trembled. I nicked my hand not on the doorknob, but on a letter opener when sorting papers. He flinched as he spoke, hand rising to show a match to the cut Poirot had observed. I regret my curiosity, but nothing more. Poirot studied him a moment, then nodded. An accidental cut is plausible, but you then met privately with Miss Travers. Your motives align, an uncle and niece concerned with succession, yet your hands bear no traces of ink from Mrs. Fairclough's desk, where the codicil was removed, so your guilt is curiosity, not malice. He allowed a brief pause, then turned to Monsieur Bouchard, the final suspect. The gardener's expression was one of weary resignation. Monsieur, Poirot said, voice soft, you entered through the window to air the study, yet you also possessed the means to approach the door unnoticed. The boot prints commingle with those of another on the garden path. You clipped petals early, marking the scene before the theft. And yet, you claim innocence of document removal and mechanism tampering. Bouchard's voice was barely audible. I did enter to air the room and to freshen the petals, but I found the codicil upon the desk and recognized its significance. I intended only to return it after sunrise. He looked up, eyes shining with regret. I did touch the doorknob by accident when I leaned in to read the writing. The needle pricked my finger, but I did not know its purpose. I fled in terror. Poirot's gaze sharpened. Madame was harmed by that same mechanism. Yet you say you fled in fear. If so, why leave the codicil where you found it? Why take the glove you wore only to drop it beneath the desk? Bouchard's head fell. I did not take the will. I did not mean to hide it. I did not know what to do. I thought. To retrieve it once I understood. But dawn found me too ashamed. A tense silence filled the room. Poirot closed his eyes, as if collecting invisible fragments of evidence. When he opened them, his manner was serene. Mes amis, observe how each suspect has now confessed a degree of wrongdoing, some trivial, some significant. Curiosity tested the knob, fear prompted flight, ambition provoked hesitation. Yet the one crime remains unsolved. Who intended harm, concealed the codicil, and orchestrated the will's disappearance? His gaze swept the circle, lingering on each face. He tapped his cane softly. Tonight I have applied pressure, psychological, emotional, moral. The individual who intended malice has not yet broken. They still cling to falsehood as a shield. Tomorrow we shall reconstruct every step from Lady Fairclough's study to the drawing room, from the terrace to the garden window. We shall watch the replay of her approach to the door, and we shall see who emerges triumphant and who falters. Poirot's voice lowered to a whisper only we could hear. The confrontation has drawn out confession from all but one. The culprit remains poised, hidden behind layers of misdirection, but the final snap of the trap awaits revelation. With that pronouncement, he rose and signaled the gathering's end. The guests departed in muted groups, each carrying the weight of their partial truths. As I followed Poirot into the corridor, I felt the tension in the air, thick and electric, like the stillness before a thunderclap. The confrontation had passed, but the true face of the murderer lay still concealed, awaiting the closing act. Chapter 13. A desperate attempt to escape. The hour was well past midnight when the hush of Fairclough Hall was shattered by a sudden clatter, a metallic crash echoing through the grand corridors like a gunshot. I jolted upright in my chair in the library, where Inspector Japp and I reviewed the day's timeline. Poirot, seated behind the desk, raised an imperious finger. "Mon Dieu, Hastings, Japp, something stirs," he murmured, pushing back from the desk. We followed him through the panelled hallway, past the closed study door, and toward the source of the noise, the north corridor, leading to Lady Fairclough's private quarters. A single lamp burned at the corridor's midpoint, its light flickering as if portentous. Poirot advanced, cane tapping softly. "Be silent," he instructed in a hushed whisper. "The culprit believes the night will conceal them." We crept forward, hearts pounding, until we saw a slender figure fumbling with the latch of the French windows at the corridor's end. It was Colonel Montford, his uniform coat flung back, boots muddy from the garden path. He paused, chest heaving, and glanced over his shoulder as if fearing pursuit. In his gloved hand, he clutched something, a rolled parchment tied with faded ribbon. Inspector Japp sprang forward, voice sharp. "Hold it right there." Montford started, nearly dropping the parchment. He attempted to swing the window open further, then bolted down the corridor toward the servants' stairs. Poirot shouted, "Stop him!" and gave chase. I followed Japp in the opposite direction to cut Montford off at the stairwell landing. Montford, eyes wild, reached the base of the stairs and twisted toward the door, only to find both exits blocked. "Give yourself up!" Japp barked, hand on his revolver. "What are you carrying, Colonel?" Montford's shoulders slumped. He dropped the parchment into my waiting hands. "The codicil," he panted. I retrieved it from the study. I meant to return it, but then I feared you would accuse me." His voice wavered between fear and defiance. I could not bear to see Lady Fairclough's intentions undone. I needed to keep it safe. Poirot emerged from the shadows, his expression grave. "You did not intend to destroy the will, but your flight confirms deeper guilt. You approached the window with intent, and that knife-like mechanism was never meant for you alone." He regarded Montford with a chilling calm. "Tell me, did you plan to deliver this parchment to someone who would secure its secrecy?" Montford shook his head, eyes brimming. No, I wanted only to protect her wishes. I believed that once I held the document, I could negotiate, convince others of its validity. But I acted rashly." He swallowed. When I heard voices in the corridor, I panicked. Poirot stepped forward, extending a hand. "Let us see the codicil, if you please." Montford crumpled and handed over the ribboned parchment. Poirot untied it and smoothed the paper on a nearby table. Under the lamp's glow, the fresh ink of the codicil gleamed, unquestionably genuine. Japp scooped up the parchment. "Colonel, you confessed your error. But do you? Recognize that your attempt to sequester this document constitutes obstruction, a crime in itself. Montfort bowed his head. I see that now. Forgive me, Inspector. Poirot, still studying the codicil, murmured, This secondary attempt, sequestering the will, was desperate indeed, yet the primary attempt on Lady Fairclough's life remains unavenged. He looked up, meeting Montfort's gaze. Your panic has provided clarity, Colonel. The true culprit did not flee when fear struck, but remained composed, ready to commit their final act. As Montfort was led away to await formal charges, the dawn threatened on the horizon, pale and uncertain. In the corridor's silence, Poirot turned to us both. Hastings Japp, observe well. The desperate flight reveals not only fear of exposure, but fear of interruption. Whoever planned the primary crime would never abandon their scheme in panic. They would stand their ground. He tapped the codicil gently. Now, with this portion of the drama concluded, we proceed to the final piece, where the culprit's composure will betray them at last. And so, as the first grey light of morning crept into Fairclough Hall, we reclaimed the codicil and tightened the net around the last suspect, ready to watch how they would face the ultimate unmasking. Chapter 14. The final piece falls into place. The sun had scarcely crested the horizon when I joined Hercule Poirot in the drawing-room once more. The grand windows glowed with pale light, illuminating the polished mahogany and ancestral portraits that bore silent witness to our investigation. On the central table lay an array of evidence: the dulled needle, the codicil once more, soil samples in glass vials, and the guest register cards bearing their telltale smudges and pencil marks. Inspector Japp stood at the sideboard, rubbing his hands in anticipation. Mes amis, Poirot began, voice gentle yet commanding, we arrive at the threshold of truth. Every piece, however small, must now be assembled into the final tableau. One detail remains hidden from the tapestry we have woven: the identity of the hand that armed the doorknob, removed the codicil, and brewed the fearful brew. He stepped forward, lifting the guest cards one by one. Lord Caversham's smudge showed curiosity tested but retracted. Miss Travers's pencil carrette marked a promise unfulfilled. Colonel Montfort's compass and boots betrayed hesitation, not resolve. Miss Clark's pigments and glove hinted at clandestine visits, yet her guilt lay in artistry rather than malice. Monsieur Bouchard's petals spoke of unnoticed care, not of lethal intent. Poirot set the cards aside and raised the glass vial containing the coarse grit from the corridor. This grit belonged to the driveway boots, the boots of one who both entered and exited with purpose. Yet none of our suspects wears such footwear normally. The gardener's boots carried only fine sand. The colonel's were polished dress boots. Miss Clark wore dainty slippers. Lord Caversham's mud was confined to a brief test. Miss Travers's shoes bore the carpet pile only. He paused to let the implication sink in. Then, with the smallest of smiles, he produced a final vial, a fragment of black velvet, no larger than a fingertip. This, he pronounced, setting the fragment upon the table, fell from the hem of the person who departed the scene moments before Lady Fairclough first gripped that silver knob. I found it lodged beneath the threshold when I examined the door late last night. Too small to notice at first, yet unmistakable once sought. Black velvet, a material worn by only one guest in our circle. He turned to Lord Caversham, clad in midnight blue velvet, and to Colonel Montfort's frock coat, likewise trimmed in velvet. Both men exchanged glances. Poirot gestured to the heavy coat hanging by the door. The colonel's coat lacks any shred along its hem. Its fabric is intact. Lord Caversham's evening coat, however, he stepped toward the upholstered armchair, shows a minute tear near the left pocket. Observe the lining beneath the velvet. It matches this fragment precisely. He placed the velvet scrap beside a swatch cut discreetly from Caversham's coat lapel, confirming the match. Caversham paled, fingertips brushing the armrest. I tore it while assisting Lady Fairclough with her cloak. It was unnoticed until now. His voice wavered. Poirot inclined his head. An honest explanation, yet one poorly timed. You claim this tear occurred in a moment of kindness. But that tear placed you at the threshold of the mechanism, precisely where the fragment was found. Only someone pressing from the inside against that velvet could have left this mark. Lord Caversham swallowed. I did enter the corridor, yes. I tested the knob once, only once. I felt its resistance and withdrew in alarm. I did not know of the mechanism's blade. He cast his eyes skyward. I would never have hurt Lady Fairclough. Poirot's moustaches twitched in sympathy. Intent to harm is the measure of guilt, yet the blade did strike you lightly, evidenced by your minor cut, and the fragment you left indicates repeated contact with the knob, but you withdrew before the knife deployed its full force. He turned to Inspector Japp. Japp, see that Caversham's gloves and coat are retained. We shall confirm the cut on his palm matches the mechanism's blade depth. Japp nodded, moving to secure the garments. Poirot returned to me. Hastings, each suspect has shown fear or curiosity, but only one exhibited composed resolve. The velvet fragment and the cut wrist reveal both hesitation and knowledge, yet the fatal blade lodged in the knob suggests full intent. He tapped his chin thoughtfully. The true culprit would proceed without recoil. He surveyed the room, his gaze passing over each face. Who among us showed no tremor? Who stood poised even after the mechanism's betrayal? His eyes settled on Miss Evelyn Clark, whose posture remained unaffected by the morning light. Her auburn hair gleamed defiantly, and her dark eyes held steady. Poirot stepped toward her, producing the dulled needle. Miss Clark, you wore velvet gloves earlier, gloves that have since vanished from your person. I searched your studio for them, but found only a single glove in the gardener's pigments. You left the other here. He held her gaze unflinchingly. Your artistry demands precision, every detail accounted for. Yet you left the mechanism itself intact for a second activation, a sign not of mistake, but of design. Evelyn's composure cracked for a moment. She swallowed, voice steady but eyes betraying a spark of panic. I needed to test my theory of the spring's action before turning to the will. I did not intend real harm. She paused, as though weighing confession. I was to entrap Lord Caversham, to force him to admit collusion with Miss Travers. But then Lady Fairclough turned the knob. Poirot nodded. Exactly. You engineered a false lead to expose a conspiracy. But in doing so, you set a trap not only for your suspects, but for your mistress. He lifted the dulled needle. This instrument was designed to draw blood. Your pigment barter with the gardener supplied the materials. Your stolen sketch of the screw positions provided the blueprint. And this velvet, borrowed from Caversham's coat, disguised your own glove prints. Miss Clark's face paled. I admit my errors, but I never wished Lady Fairclough permanent harm, only a demonstration. She trembled, tears welling. I believed I could control the mechanism, stop it before lethal force, but I misjudged. Poirot's expression softened. Intent without caution is still intent. You played a dangerous game of psychological theatre, hoping the mechanism itself would cast suspicion elsewhere. and it nearly succeeded. He turned to the assembled guests. Mes amis, the final piece has fallen into place. The culprit is revealed, not by a leap of deduction, but by the silent fragment of velvet, the blade's cut, and the unbroken resolve of an artist. Inspector Japp moved forward to place gentle restraints on Miss Clark's trembling hands. She did not resist, head bowed in contrition. Poirot addressed Lady Fairclough, who had been summoned and now stood at the threshold, fragile strength emanating from her bandaged throat. Madame, the truth is yours once more. Your will, your safety, and your peace. He offered her the recovered codicil. Justice need not be harsh when guided by compassion. Lady Fairclough received the parchment with trembling hands, eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You have protected more than my life. You have preserved my dignity. Poirot inclined his head. Mon plaisir, madame. And to all assembled, may this lesson in the power of small details guide you henceforth. The greatest truths lie often in the smallest of fragments. As the morning light brightened the room, the mechanism's silent witnesses, the velvet, the needle, the soil, lay finally at rest. The final piece had fallen into place, and with it, the case at Fairclough Hall was brought to its long-awaited resolution. Chapter 15. The Final Gathering. Late that afternoon, the drawing-room of Fairclough Hall became our stage once more. Sunlight slanted through heavy draperies, casting long stripes across the polished floor, while the ancestral portraits seemed to lean in, eager spectators to the drama's climax. In the centre, Monsieur Poirot had arranged 6 chairs in a precise semicircle, each labelled with a guest's name. Beyond them, Lady Fairclough sat in her chaise, the codicil safely in her lap, and Inspector Japp stood ready with his notebook. I took my place beside Poirot, pen poised for the final rehearsal of events. Mes amis, Poirot announced, voice both courteous and commanding. We reach the culminating moment of our investigation. You have each endured tests of character, probes of motive, and the unmasking of lesser deceptions. Now we shall reconstruct, step by step, the precise sequence of last evening's events, from terrace to study, corridor to drawing room. He paused to let the gravity of the undertaking settle. Attend carefully, for the smallest hesitation or misstep may yet reveal what remains hidden. He turned to Lord Caversham, whose velvet coat bore the faint tear discovered in the morning. Lord Caversham, please take the position you occupied on the terrace at 7 p.m., immediately before entry to the hall. Stand here by the French windows. Caversham rose and moved to the spot, matching his posture to Poirot's earlier description, upright and composed. Very good, Poirot praised. Now, Miss Travers, you found your aunt collapsed at the foot of the corridor. Please place yourself in that position. Olivia Travers, still pale, rose and stood a few paces down the corridor, glancing back toward the study door as she had that night. Excellent, Poirot said, noting her trembling hands. And Colonel Montford, you paused here, near the east corridor, to consult your compass. The colonel stepped forward and held his imaginary compass as he had, turning his head right and left, searching for direction. Poirot then beckoned Miss Clark. You sketched the door from this vantage at 7:15. Please stand by the threshold. Evelyn Clark moved to the doorframe, setting her feet just as if she would have leaned to examine the mechanism, eyelashes lowered in concentration. Finally, Monsieur Bouchard approached the window by the rose bed. You entered here, monsieur, under cover of darkness. Show us your path, from garden to door. The gardener traced his route, each footstep measured and cautious. Poirot surveyed the tableau with satisfaction. Now, attention to detail. Lady Fairclough, please describe your own movements from the library to the drawing-room last night. She rose and, under Inspector Japp's direction, walked the straight line from library side table, through the corridor, to the door where her study awaited unveiling. As she paused at the door, Poirot spoke in a low voice. At this exact moment, the assailant depressed the hidden spring. Who among you stood nearest? Who could have placed a hand upon the knob without arousing Lady Fairclough's suspicion until the instant of injury? He gestured inward, and each suspect shifted slightly, as though to realign their mental maps. The room grew still, each individual caught in the network of lines they had just traced. Poirot continued, "Notice how the light falls here at 7. Shadows mask a figure in velvet, and only one of you could step into this shadow without pause." He pointed to Lord Caversham's position, the velvet fragment's source. Caversham's shoulders tightened, but he did not move. "Observe, too," Poirot went on, "how the window's latch clicks overhead at the precise moment Lady Fairclough turned the knob. The intrusion from outside, the fluttering of petals, the near-silent approach, these mark the path of our gardener." Bouchard's face paled, but he held his ground. Poirot's gaze then settled on Colonel Montfort, whose compass position left him momentarily aligned with the corridor light. And here the colonel hesitated, his gaze drifting toward the study door, as though torn between duty and desire. Montfort swallowed, jaw clenched. "And Miss Clark," Poirot concluded, voice soft but unmistakable. "Your portrayal of the screw alignments, your glove in the study, and your precise step into the shadow here, all speak of intentional design rather than accident." Evelyn's lip trembled, but she remained upright. A silence followed as each person absorbed the final rehearsal. Poirot raised his hand, palm outward, as if holding back a tide of truth. "Mes amis, this final gathering has drawn every fragment into a single pattern. Tomorrow, in the same positions, we shall proceed with the grand reveal, where the hidden hand, guided by motive and masked by misdirection, will at last be unmasked." He lowered his hand. "Until then, reflect on your part in these movements, and let the tension of anticipation sharpen your recollection. For at dawn, the final curtain will rise." With that, the suspects were escorted from the drawing-room under Inspector Japp's watch, each lingering at the threshold, eyes flicking back as though expecting shadows to move. Poirot gave me a small nod of satisfaction. The stage was set, the actors in place, and the final gathering complete, poised on the brink of revelation. Chapter 16. The Reveal. The next morning, Fairclough Hall's drawing-room stood in austere readiness. The 6 chairs were in place, the evidence arrayed upon the central table, and the sunlight filtered through heavy draperies in measured patterns. The suspects entered one by one, Lord Caversham with a stately bow, Miss Travers with a tremor of anticipation, Colonel Montfort with composure strained like taut cord, Miss Clark's auburn hair catching the light in defiance, and Monsieur Bouchard moving with solemn restraint. Inspector Japp and I took our positions beside Poirot, whose presence seemed to fill the room with an expectant hush. "Mes amis," Poirot began, voice rich with gravitas, "we stand at the culmination of our inquiry. Before us lies the tapestry of events, each thread laid bare through courage, confession, and deception. Now I shall weave these threads into a single, unassailable design." He motioned to the evidence on the table. "Observe the dulled needle removed from the silver doorknob, its tip corroded by Lady Fairclough's blood, evidence of the blade's deployment. Consider the velvet fragment matching Lord Caversham's coat, marking repeated contact with that very knob. Note the pencil carré on the appointment card, placed by Miss Travers to secure her presence in the study. Recall Colonel Montford's compass and the boots marking hesitation in the corridor. And reflect upon Monsieur Bouchard's fine garden soil, confirming a furtive entry. Poirot paused, allowing each guest to meet his gaze. Yet these clues, while true, point to a messenger of the deed, not the mastermind. The true architect manipulated each actor, directing suspicion along false paths. We must now expose the conductor of this dark symphony. He turned to Miss Evelyn Clark, whose posture remained rigid. Mademoiselle Clark, you confessed to re-entering the study under cover of darkness, borrowing pigments in barter, and leaving your glove where it would later be found. You sketched the mechanism's screw alignments and the compass that fell from Colonel Montford's pocket. All these actions served one purpose: to sow discord among us, to cast suspicion on others while you moved freely. Evelyn's dark eyes narrowed, but she did not flinch. Poirot raised his hand, revealing the final piece of evidence. Lady Fairclough's silk evening sash, its hem freshly trimmed. Examine this sash, he instructed. Note the precise cut, executed with the same fine blade as the mechanism's needle. Who among us possesses skill with a knife so exact? Who walked the drawing room last evening wearing velvet and silk, marking each step with deliberate care? He stepped forward, pinning his gaze upon Evelyn Clark. An artist's hands, steady, precise, accustomed to delicate tools, could wield this blade with the finesse required. The sash was cut to craft a fresh sleeve lining for your glove, so as to avoid ink stains from Mrs. Fairclough's desk. You then carved the doorknob's spring mechanism in secret, using pigment brushes as makeshift files, confident that your sketches and bartered pigments would remain unnoticed. Evelyn's composure cracked. She drew in a trembling breath. Monsieur Poirot, I did not plan to harm her permanently. I sought only to expose Lord Caversham, to watch him waver under the blade's threat. I intended to remove the codicil and reveal his collusion with Miss Travers. Then I would return the will, vindicating my art by unmasking greed. Poirot's eyes softened, yet remained unwavering. An empirical experiment in human nature, yes, but one that nearly claimed a life. You underestimated the mechanism's lethality and overestimated your control. When Lady Fairclough approached the door, her turn of the knob triggered the needle, drawing blood more deeply than you intended. He turned to the group. All of you acted, tested the knob, marked the cards, hesitated in the corridor, entered through the window, but Miss Clark alone possessed the artistry, the motive, and the means to conceive such an intricate scheme. He gestured to the velvet fragment and the sash. These fragments, combined with the cut on her palm, matching the blade's angle, complete the portrait of guilt. Evelyn bowed her head, tears streaming. I take full responsibility. I have betrayed my patron, my friends, and my own integrity. She stood resolute in her admission, the weight of her confession settling over the room like a benediction. Poirot nodded. Your confession spares no further need for reconstruction, yet let us confirm the final detail. He beckoned to Inspector Japp, who produced the sash and held it. Alongside the fragment, the match was unmistakable. Thus, Poirot concluded, the revelation stands. Miss Evelyn Clark, in pursuit of artistic truth, set events in motion that endangered a life and threatened a legacy. Her artistry, once admired, became the instrument of deception. Lady Fairclough rose from her chaise. Her voice, though frail, carried steady resolve. I thank you, Monsieur Poirot, for guiding me to this truth. Mademoiselle Clark's talents shall find other expression away from such perilous games. Evelyn inclined her head, tears falling. I accept whatever justice you deem fit, madame. Poirot offered a gentle bow. Justice tempered by mercy is the mark of true resolution. He faced the assembled company. Let this reveal stand as a testament, in the smallest of details, velvet fibres, pencil strokes, blade marks, lie the grandest truths. With the culprit unmasked and her motives laid bare, the final gathering dissolved into a poignant stillness, the mechanical puzzle of Fairclough Hall at last unravelled, its secrets surrendered to Poirot's little grey cells. Chapter 17. Outcome and Justice. As the hush settled over Fairclough Hall in the wake of Miss Clark's confession, I found myself reflecting on the curious nature of justice. In that grand drawing-room, shaded by ancestral portraits and the soft afternoon light, we had watched motives and misdirections fall away like autumn leaves, revealing the stark branch of truth. Now, with the culprit unmasked, the time had come for consequence and reconciliation. Lady Fairclough rose from her chaise longue, the codicil cradled gently in her hands. Her once fragile composure had regained its customary dignity. She looked toward Miss Clark, whose auburn head bowed in contrition, and spoke with measured kindness. "Evelyn," she said, "though your actions endangered me, I believe in the power of redemption. You shall be spared the full force of legal punishment, on the condition that you devote yourself to true service, a commission to paint the hall's gardens, capturing their beauty rather than manipulating their secrets." Miss Clark lifted her head, tears glistening. "Lady Fairclough, your mercy humbles me. I accept this opportunity to atone." Her voice trembled, yet there was gratitude and resolve in her tone. The atmosphere, once taut with tension, softened in that moment of compassionate justice. Inspector Japp, standing beside Poirot, exchanged a satisfied nod with the detective. "Madame," he said, "given the mitigating circumstances, your will preserved, no lasting harm done, and the culprit's own confession, I believe this outcome serves both law and mercy." Lady Fairclough inclined her head to the inspector, then turned to Monsieur Bouchard. "And you, who feared your own involvement, shall retain your position here, monsieur. Your horticultural skills remain invaluable, provided you abide by the hall's protocols." The gardener's relief was evident as he bowed deeply. "Thank you, madame," he murmured. "I shall never again presume to meddle beyond my duties." Poirot, ever the arbiter of human nuance, stepped forward to address Colonel Montfort and Lord Caversham, both of whom wore expressions of sombre reflection. "Colonel," he began, "your loyalty to young Edward was true, though tempered by ambition. I trust you will continue your tutelage, now guided by humility rather than desire for favour." Montfort nodded, voice steady. "I pledge to serve only his welfare, monsieur." "And you, Lord Caversham?" Poirot turned to the uncle whose friendship with Miss Travers had sowed such suspicion. "Your generosity has always been sincere. I hope this experience teaches you caution in matters of inheritance, but not to withdraw from kindness." Caversham bowed, his manner gentler than at any previous point. "You have my gratitude, Monsieur Poirot. I shall endeavour to restore trust rather than seek advantage." Miss Olivia Travers, seated beside her uncle, watched them with bright eyes. When Poirot addressed her, his tone was almost paternal. "Mademoiselle, your love for your aunt was unquestionable, yet your curiosity led you astray. Continue to cherish her trust, and let this be a lesson that care, when tempered by discretion, is the truest guard of affection. Olivia's response was heartfelt. I will, monsieur. I vow never again to intrude upon her privacy. Finally, Poirot turned to me and Inspector Japp, a small, almost shy smile briefly loosening his formidable composure. Mon ami Hastings, he said, and our dear friend Japp, without your steady assistance, I could not have unravelled these threads. Thank you. I bowed, touched by his commendation. It was my privilege, Monsieur Poirot. Your little grey cells guided us all. Japp slapped. His notebook closed. And I confess I underestimated the subtlety of our culprit's design. You have taught me a valuable lesson. The law demands evidence, but the heart demands understanding. With the circle of justice complete, Lady Fairclough rose to speak once more, her voice imbued with warmth. Friends, she began, our trial has tested the bonds of loyalty and the strength of mercy. Let us now break bread together in fellowship to celebrate truth restored and trust renewed. She gestured to the long dining table, where fresh linens and the hall's finest china awaited. As we took our places, the drawing-room's tension dissolved into a gentle camaraderie. Lord Caversham engaged Miss Travers in light conversation about the gardens. Colonel Montfort quietly offered insights into Edward's next history lesson. Monsieur Bouchard shared a few tips on rose cultivation with Lady Fairclough, and even Miss Clark, who sat apart, was approached with genuine kindness, offered a place at the table and a chance at redemption. I glanced at Poirot, who observed the scene with a satisfied gleam in his grey eyes. He leaned toward me and whispered, Hastings, justice has many faces, punishment, mercy, restoration. Today we have seen them all. I nodded, and all without a harsh word, to the truly innocent. He smiled, his moustaches twinkling. Ah, but sometimes the greatest kindness is justice itself. He sat back, content to let the gentle hum of heartfelt laughter and quiet conversation fill the room. As the midday sun climbed higher, sealing our day of reckoning with a promise of brighter tomorrows, I reflected on the strange alchemy of truth, how deception, examined under the light of compassion, could yield a far richer resolution than any verdict alone. Fairclough Hall, once shadowed by intrigue, now stood in renewed warmth, its inhabitants bonded by the trial we had endured, and guided by the deft hand of a detective who understood that justice, tempered by mercy, is the highest art of all. Chapter 18. The Closing Remark. The drawing-room glowed with the warmth of late afternoon when the final curtain fell on the affair at Fairclough Hall. The fragrances of roses drifted in through the open window, mingling with tea and aged wood, as if nature itself were offering its benediction. Lady Fairclough, seated in her chaise longue by the fireplace, held the codicil in one hand and a cup of fresh ginger tea in the other. Her first truly peaceful draught since the attempt on her life. Around her, the restored circle of friends and servants lingered, each touched by the day's revelations and the mercy that had followed. I stood beside Hercule Poirot, whose posture was relaxed for the first time in our many hours of investigation. His little grey cells had deciphered every riddle, exposed every hidden motive, and guided us to a resolution that balanced justice with compassion. Now, as the hall settled into gentle quiet, he permitted himself a small, satisfied smile. Mon ami, he whispered to me, all that remained was the closing note, the final brushstroke upon the canvas of human folly and forgiveness. I nodded, understanding the depths of his meaning. Each suspect had undergone a transformation. Miss Clark's pride humbled into contrition. Lord Caversham's guarded generosity rekindled into genuine charity. Colonel Montford's ambition tempered by humility, Miss Travers's curiosity guided into faithful devotion, Monsieur Bouchard's fear transformed into steadfast service, and Lady Fairclough, once a target, emerged as the gracious orchestrator of mercy. We moved toward her with measured steps. The guests instinctively gave space, as though recognizing the sacred moment. Poirot raised his voice just enough to carry across the room. "Madame," he began, "you entrusted me with your safety and the preservation of your final wishes. In this, we have honored your dignity. But a detective's work is never merely to solve puzzles. It is to restore the balance of the human heart." Lady Fairclough inclined her head, pale blue eyes bright with gratitude. "Monsieur Poirot, your words bring comfort as much as your deductions brought truth. I cannot thank you enough for your wisdom and your kindness." Poirot bowed deeply, tipping his hat with characteristic flair. "It is my greatest pleasure, madam." I glanced at the assembled company, the colonel adjusting his uniform with newfound ease, Lord Caversham offering his arm to Miss Travers, the gardener, Monsieur Bouchard, quietly replacing the rose petals in their silver vase, and Miss Clark, cheeks still flushed, her posture both contrite and resolute, as she accepted a seated place beside Lady Fairclough. Then Poirot turned to me, a playful glint in his eyes. "Hastings, you have kept such detailed notes throughout our journey. Perhaps you will record this final chapter as we depart." I smiled. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. It would be an honor." He tapped his cane on the parquet floor. "But first, to the matter of departure. I trust you have laid out my little grey cell's traveller's kit." I produced his silver case from my coat pocket. Inside lay his neatly folded handkerchief, a small packet of his favourite chocolates, and a fresh magnifying glass. He accepted the case, offering me a gentle nod. "Merci, mon ami. Let us be on our way, though I confess I shall miss these corridors and their secrets." Lady Fairclough rose, steadying herself on her porcelain teacup. "Monsieur Poirot, before you leave, one small favour. Share with us one final reflection on this curious affair." He paused at the threshold of the drawing-room, surveying each face as if committing it to memory. Then, with a theatrical flourish, he addressed the room in tones both witty and wise. "In every crime there lies a lesson about human nature," he began, voice resonant. "Some crimes emerge from greed, others from fear, some from ambition, and some from a desire to reveal the hidden truths of the heart. Yet the most perilous weapon is not the blade concealed in a doorknob, but the unchecked curiosity that drives one to manipulate fate. Mademoiselle Clark's artistry taught us that the search for truth must never eclipse compassion. Lord Caversham reminds us that generosity, though sometimes entangled with self-interest, can yet be redeemed. Colonel Montford shows that devotion must be guided by humility, not desire. Miss Travers teaches that love flourishes best when balanced by discretion. And Monsieur Bouchard reveals that service is noblest when confined to its proper bounds." He allowed a brief pause, as though letting each lesson settle. Then, with a twinkle in his eye, he concluded, "But above all, mes amis, remember this. When the little grey cells are put to rest, it is the warm beating of the heart, bound by mercy, forgiveness, and generosity, that sustains us, and that, I humbly submit, is the greatest mystery of all." A gentle murmur of agreement rose through the room. Lady Fairclough dabbed her eyes with a lace handkerchief. Even Miss Clark's tears were partly those of newfound resolve rather than shame. Poirot turned to me, extending his arm. "Come, Hastings. Our carriage awaits, and the road calls. I took his arm, and we crossed the threshold together. Outside, the garden paths glittered with dew, and the rose petals fell softly at our feet, a delicate reminder of the fragility and beauty of these human affairs. As the carriage door closed, I caught one last glimpse of the drawing room. Lady Fairclough standing by the hearth, surrounded by her friends, each embodying a lesson learned at the hall's expense. I leaned toward Poirot and murmured, "Do you think they will remember your words?" He gave a low chuckle. "Mon ami, I do not know if they will remember every lesson, but they will remember kindness, and that is the true legacy of a detective's work." He settled onto the carriage seat, and with the faintest flick of the reins, we rolled away down the tree-lined drive. In the soft morning light, Fairclough Hall receded into the mists, its secrets laid bare, and its lessons engraved upon our hearts. And as we journeyed onward, I knew that both mystery and mercy would linger long in our memories, proof that even the darkest puzzles can yield the brightest revelations when guided by the light of compassion.